Jules Verne, born in February 1828 and passing away in March 1905, was a master of science fiction in 19th century France, often referred to as the father of scientific fantasy. Throughout his lifetime, he authored over 100 works of science fiction, including 64 novels, with a total word count reaching approximately 7 to 8 million words. His most significant achievement is a collection of science fiction and adventure novels entitled Extraordinary Voyages in the Known and Unknown Worlds, encompassing a vast array of topics from Earth to outer space, as well as geology, geography, aerospace, and navigation. Verne lived during an era marked by the rise of capitalism and rapid advancements in science and technology. His works serve both as products of that time and as mirrors reflecting its essence, articulating the yearning for liberation from manual, small-scale production towards the realiza tie-in of large-scale capitalist production. They also illuminate the profound impact that scientific and technological progress had on the realm of human thought. Most of Verne's science fiction novels feature themes of adventurous voyages that, under the technological constraints of his time, were deemed impossible. Some narratives traverse the timeline, spanning the past, present, and future, while others explore spatial dimensions, encompassing both the heavens and the depths of the earth. Many of his stories intertwine both temporal and spatial elements. Chapter 1. The Sailing Ship in the Angry Sea. The waves surged violently. The winds howled furiously. Dark clouds rolled ominously, and the sea lay shrouded in darkness, evoking a sense of dread. This was the night of March 9, 1860. A grand sailing vessel struggled through the tumultuous waters, tormented by the roaring sea, swaying precariously as it battled the elements. At the battered stern of the vessel, for young boys manned the helm. Though not particularly large, they appear to be of similar age, approximately 13 or 14 years, St. Ed fastly navigating the sailboat amidst perilous conditions. The waves roared and raged around them, yet they remained undaunted. The cabin windows swung open, revealing two small heads, accompanied by the visage of a dog, which barked twice. The two heads inquired about Brian's well-being, to which he replied that all was well and urged them not to worry. A boy named Dole exclaimed, "We are frightened." Brian encouraged them, saying, "Do not be afraid, everything will be fine." Indeed, the tumultuous ocean waves posed a formidable challenge, and it was impossible for the children aboard the ship not to feel fear. Astonishingly, aboard the Sloggy, a grand sailing vessel, were merely a handful of children, the eldest not exceeding 14 years. In total, there were 15 children on the ship. What events had transpired aboard this vessel? Such a sizable sailing ship ought to have a captain, an officer, and 5 or 6 crew members. Could it be that only a solitary apparat sailor remained to steer the ship? From whence did this vessel originate? Did it come from the shores of Australia or one of the islands of Oceania? Furthermore, what destination lay ahead? Having navigated into such deep waters, what manner of captain led them? Yet, in this expanse, amidst the maritime routes of Oceania and the Pacific, not a single ship could be seen, whether steamship or sailing vessel, making its way from Europe or America. To the myriad ports of the Pacific, the storm has intensified, with the sailboat battered mercilessly by the tempestuous sea. The main mast had splintered 2 days prior, breaking 4 feet from the deck, and the mainsail no longer billowed. The triangular sail at the bow had long since been reduced to tattered remnants, and what remained of the sail was merely the frayed foresail. Despite their current plight, the boys had yet to spot any land. Undaunted by the raging storm, they faced the relentless waves crashing against their vessel, each surge a formidable adversary. They fervently hoped that the sight of land would herald their salvation, a realm not of boundless ocean, but of solid ground and anchor of safety. Mike, an apprentice sailor, possessed navigational experience, while Brian had also acquired some knowledge during his journey from Europe to Oceania, where the ship traversed the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Along the way, he gleaned various sailing techniques, making him and Mike the only passengers aboard capable of steering the craft, unlike the rest of their inexperienced companions. Without hesitation, Brian and Mike made their way to the bow, determined to prevent the vessel from capsizing. They resolved to do whatever it took to raise the lower section and remove the sagging foresail. Even if the rigging were to snap, the base of the foremast remained intact, rendering the ship incapable of a straight course. However, detaching the foresail proved to be no simple task. Brian and Mike were exceptionally astute. As the storm raged relentlessly, it became imperative to raise the remaining sails to allow the vessel to navigate with the wind. Swiftly, the two untangled the sail's halyards, using a small knife to sever the tattered sections of the foresail, which they subsequently removed, tying a corner of the lower sail to a sturdy wooden post. Despite the fierce winds and tumultuous waves battering them, they stood resolute, bravely overcoming the perilous situation. The sailboat surged forward at an alarming speed, the cabin illuminated only by a dim lamp, casting faint shadows in the meager light. Brian observed 10 children nestled on benches and beds, the youngest huddled together, terror etched on their faces by the tumultuous scene unfolding around each. Brian reassured them, saying, "Fear not. It is not as dire as it seems. Things will improve." He retrieved the small lamp from the bed, meticulously examining every nook of the cabin, where water had begun to seep in. It turned out that the colossal waves had crashed against the bow, allowing seawater to invade through the crew's hatch and flood the cabin, causing the stern to become heavy. Yet, this influx of water posed no threat to the sturdy vessel. The boat was robustly constructed, with its hull sheathed in new copper plates, impervious to leaks, capable of endure. Even the mightiest of waves that moment. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. The ominous clouds above the sea not only failed to disperse, but seemed to congeal further as the winds howled ferociously. The ship pressed onward, seemingly on the verge of sinking into the depths, while the sharp cries of the sea swallows pierced the air. An hour had elapsed when the sound of the sail being torn by the wind echoed again. The already damaged foresail was once more rent asunder, ultimately disintegrating into fragments that fluttered away in disarray. "This is absolutely dreadful," Donovan exclaimed. "No other sails can be raised. Be cautious," Mike shouted. "A massive wave is approaching from behind." Before Mike could finish his warning, several tons of seawater surged onto the vessel, throwing Brian, Gordon, and Donovan towards the hatchway. The three clung tightly to one another, yet Mike had vanished. The colossal wave crashed against both the bow and the stern, sweeping away a portion of the raft, 2 lifeboats, a utility boat, and the compass box into the sea. The ship's railing was shattered, and seawater immediately poured in, but the vessel did not sink. The three called out Mike's name. "I'm here. I'm here," Mike suddenly replied. "Not in the water," Gordon remarked. "The voice seems to be coming from the bow." At that moment, Brian seemed to hear a faint cry. He swiftly made his way to the windlass, where there was a step, and he frantically groped around. Finally, in a corner at the bow, he found Mike, who was desperately struggling as a line was tightly wrapped around his neck. It turned out that when a massive wave struck, the line had ensnared him, and he was on the verge of being choked to death. Things took a turn for the worse with the foresails gone. The speed of the sailboat plummeted, placing it in grave danger. The waves, moving faster than the boat, surged from behind. What could be done? The fate of the sailboat was no longer in Brian and the others' hands. In March of the Southern Hemisphere, it is September in the Northern Hemisphere. Around 4:30, the sky gradually brightened. The four of them, Brian and his companions, gazed at the tumultuous waves, pondering that if the storm did not subside, they would be left with no escape in just 24 hours. The hatch would be engulfed by the towering swells. Suddenly, Mike exclaimed in delight. "Land!" He pointed towards the east, claiming to have spotted what seemed to be the coastline. Indeed, not far ahead lay a patch of land, visible within a range of 5 or 6 nautical miles along the horizon. According to the wind's direction, the Sloggy would require only another half hour to reach it, provided the vessel did not run aground or suffer damage before landing. At that moment, a fierce gale arose, and the Sloggy surged forward like a seabird with wings, swiftly approaching the shore. The coastline became increasingly discernible, revealing a stark black beach against the backdrop of the sky, with dense woods to the right and towering rocks standing proud. May God bless these brave and unfortunate young heroes as they safely set foot upon that land. Donovan, Gordon, and Mike took the helm while Brian moved towards the bow of the ship. They were nearing the land, yet could not find a safe harbor for the vessel. It seemed destined to run aground. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the Sloggy was nearing the reef. The vessel immediately began to sway, having run aground, yet no water had yet breached the hull. Suddenly, a colossal wave surged forth, propelling the sailboat forward for 50 feet, where it collided with an enormous rock ahead. Consequently, the port's side tilted, succumbing to the relentless assault of the waves, as the sailboat became stranded amidst a cluster of smaller rocks behind the great boulder. Chapter 2. Stranded and stalled. The fog that enveloped the sea had dissipated, allowing for a clear view of the vast expanse surrounding the sailing vessel. The clouds in the sky continued to race by, while the fierce winds remained as relentless as ever. The peril faced by the ship was no less significant than during the night. Monstrous waves crashed against the railings, rendering the vessel immobile yet fiercely battered. Brian and Gordon descended into the cabin to assess the situation, relieved to find that no seawater had breached the interior. The two of them continuously reassured the crew, particularly striving to calm the younger members. Brian proclaimed, "As long as the tide recedes and the winds subside slightly, we shall find a way to disembark. After the tide goes out, a portion of the submerged rocks will become exposed, making our landing considerably safer, as we can step onto those visible reefs." Although Brian's counsel was sound, Donovan and several others disregarded his advice, congregating at the bow of the ship to exchange hushed whispers. In truth, Donovan, Wolkakis, Whip, and the youth known as Klaus were reluctant to heed Brian's command. Throughout the prolonged voyage aboard the Sloggy, they had only followed Brian's lead due to his sailing experience. They had already devised a plan. Once they reached land, they intended to act independently, particularly Donovan, who fancied himself more astute than anyone else. Prior to this, Donovan had long harbored ambitions of competing with Brian, partly because Brian was French, and the English youths harbored an innate reluctance to submit to the authority of this French boy. Thus, driven by such psychological impulses, even in this critical moment, they would inevitably conjure up a series of disturbances. Brian, with his binoculars, attempted to discern the terrain of the coastal promontories, yet regrettably, the binoculars lacked sufficient range to provide clarity. If this land were indeed an island, how could they possibly abandon the vessel if the sailing ship were ensnared among the rocks? Moreover, should this island be uninhabited and devoid of any resources, the youths would be confronted with the dire issue of survival. Conversely, if this were a mainland, the prospects for survival would be considerably greater, for it must be South America, and within days of landing, they would likely encounter its inhabitants. Indeed, this nameless coastline brims with peril. At this juncture, however, there exists no alternative but to disembark. The shipwrecked boys ought to concentrate on devising a means to reach the shore, for they have yet to surpass the perilous phase. As the clock struck 7, everyone began to transfer the most essential items to the deck. The ship held provisions such as canned goods, biscuits, salt, and smoked meat, which were to be securely packaged for the older children to ferry ashore. To facilitate this transfer, they must await the emergence of the submerged rocks. With the ebbing tide, it is likely that the beach's rocky expanse would also become visible. Gordon and Brian remained intently focused on the surface of the sea. At that moment, the wind shifted, calming somewhat, and the force of the waves diminished. The water level around the rocks gradually receded, causing the sailboat to tilt increasingly to port. If this continued, the vessel would soon capsize from the side, and should water begin to flood the hull at such a precarious moment, it would spell disaster. Suddenly, Bacusta shouted from the bow. To their astonishment, the utility boat they believed had been swept away by the towering waves was entangled in ropes and still aboard. This small boat could accommodate no more than 5 or 6 individuals. They hastily pulled it onto the deck, finding it intact and serviceable. At that juncture, Brian and Donovan erupted into a loud dispute over the small boat. Just as Donovan, Wolkowski's, Weep, and Klaus were about to lower the utility boat into the sea, Brian approached and inquired, "What are you doing? Do you intend to leave in that small vessel?" "Indeed," Donovan replied. "We plan to depart from here." "Stop wasting time with him. Let us board the boat," Weep exclaimed, pushing Brian aside. Donovan and his companions resolutely attempted to push the small craft toward the ocean. Brian, however, clung tenaciously to one corner of the boat, declaring, "You cannot proceed with this. Your actions are selfish." Infuriated, Donovan retorted, "Let us clarify things first, Brian. Do not interfere with our affairs." "I shall repeat myself," Brian shouted. "I will not allow you to do this." As the argument between Brian and Donovan escalated, Gordon arrived on the scene. At this critical moment, the most seasoned and composed Gordon sided with Brian. "What have you all been doing?" he exclaimed. "Let us not engage in disputes, Donovan. The tide is still quite high and could sweep the small boat away. Do not frighten us. We have already reached land." Donovan retorted. But it is not yet time, Gordon replied, his irritation evident. Donovan, do not be so obstinate. If we intend to take the small boat, the moment is not yet right. We should wait a little longer. Gordon adeptly quelled an impending altercation. The tide receded by 2 feet. Yet the vessel could not navigate through the treacherous rocks. Brian, surveying the situation from the foremast, gained a clear understanding of the surroundings and the topography, and then proceeded to the bow, grasping the rope and stepping onto the beam. Amidst the rocks, Brian discerned a passage flanked by stone on either side, through which the small boat could potentially reach the shore. However, the sailboat was still ensnared by swirling eddies. It was impossible to advance without risk of striking the jagged rocks that would surely shatter the vessel. They could only wait for the turbulence to subside before attempting to sail. Standing on the beam, Brian peered through his telescope at the cliffs beyond, then examined the coastline, noting that the 2 capes stretched approximately 8 or 9 miles apart, devoid of any signs of human habitation. After observing for roughly half an hour, Brian descended from the beam and shared his findings with the group. Gordon suggested that the most opportune time for landing would be around 11 o'clock, meticulously arranging the landing plan. The group then partook of canned goods and biscuits to satisfy their hunger. Brian exhibited extraordinary concern for his companions, reassuring Jenkins, A.I. Wason, Dole, and Costa, the younger members of their group, to remain calm. He then approached Gordon, and both sensed a slight change in the wind. Without the wind, the tide would recede more rapidly. We must take action, Gordon declared. Give up hope, Brian. Do not wait any longer. We must cautiously initiate our plans. You are absolutely correct. Let us disembark before the tide rises. There exists a method, Brian proposed, to untie the rope and secure one end to the rock's edge, thus providing a chance for landing. Who will tie the rope? I shall, Brian asserted resolutely. I will assist you, Gordon offered. No, I shall do it alone. Brian resolved to tie the rope himself, risking his own safety for the sake of his companions. The vessel was equipped with life bags, which Brian instructed his friends to take. Once the water was shallow enough to merely cover their feet, the older children would pull the rope, guiding the boat toward the shore. With 45 minutes remaining until 11 o'clock, the tide might recede to its lowest point. The water level at the bow had already dipped to a mere 4 or 5 feet, seemingly at its nadir. This plan was fraught with peril. Yet Brian never considered allowing another to assume his role. The ship contained numerous ropes, each approximately 100 feet in length, and Brian selected a sturdy, uniformly thick rope to secure around his waist. Everyone, come here to pull the rope, quickly, Gordon shouted. Donovan, Wilkowskis, Klaus, and Whip were compelled to join in this vital endeavor, for it was the most pressing matter at hand. As Brian plunged into the sea, he swam forward with the current, the rope rapidly extending behind him. Navigating such tumultuous waters was exceedingly arduous. The waves violently crashed against the rocks, rendering this brave youth nearly immobile amidst the swirling tides. It was evident that securing the rope to the hidden reefs was unfeasible. By afternoon, the tide was about to rise, and the force of the waves intensified once more. Due to the new moon, the surf was more ferocious than the previous night, and the vessel remained shrouded in fog, creating a dire predicament. The boys aboard the ship huddled at the stern as the tide surged with renewed vigor, compounding their plight. The wind, reminiscent of the previous evening, blew fiercely from the west, causing water levels to rise. Should the waves escalate further, the Sloggy would be at risk of capsizing. Approaching 2 p.m., the Sloggy, buoyed by the rising tide, ceased its list to port, and the sailboat began to sway. The boys clung to one another to prevent falling overboard. At that moment, a colossal wave, akin to a mountain and towering at 20 feet, surged towards the sailboat, forcing the Sloggy to drift with the tide. Caught in the vortex of the waves, the grand vessel soon found itself thrust onto the beach, a mere 200 feet from the thicket beneath the cliff, ultimately becoming ensnared in the firm earth, immobile. Chapter 3. The Disappearance of the Sailboat in Auckland. The capital of New Zealand, there exists a prestigious boarding school known as Charman School, which accommodates over 100 students, all hailing from influential local families. Unfortunately, the children of the indigenous Maori people are unable to attend schools in Auckland. At Charman School, the students are the offspring of English, French, American, and German lineage, receiving an education that mirrors the excellence found in their respective homelands. New Zealand, an island nation embraced by the sea, boasts breathtaking scenery. On the afternoon of February 15, 1860, the students of Charman School joyfully departed in the company of their parents, brimming with excitement as the school commenced its 2-month holiday. During this break, The students would revel in the freedom to play at will, eager to embark on a maritime adventure. The students planned to sail along the coast of New Zealand aboard the splendid tall ship, the Sloggy. The school had arranged a 6-week voyage. Having borrowed the magnificent Sloggy from the vessel's owner, Captain William H. Netto, a man of impeccable integrity, the parents wholeheartedly supported their children, ensuring that the voyage would be both safe and joyous. The youths were elated at the prospect of setting sail during their holiday, a truly delightful opportunity. The school organized the students into 5 classes based on their ages, granting them ample freedom, yet imposing strict discipline. When punishment was deemed necessary, the British students, if subjected to unjust corporal punishment, felt their dignity had been affronted. However, they accepted their consequences without dispute, fully aware that wrongdoing must be met with accountability. It is widely recognized that the British place great importance on tradition, both in their personal and social lives. Upper-grade students provide selfless assistance to their lower-grade counterparts, while the latter must show due respect to the former. Unlike their French peers, these students adhere strictly to school rules and regulations. The participants of the voyage aboard the Slowhy were meticulously selected from Charman School, comprising 15 young individuals aged between 8 and 14. Upon stepping aboard the Slowhy, these 15 youths embarked on a thrilling adventure. It is essential to introduce these young adventurers in detail, including their names, ages, abilities, personalities, family backgrounds, and their relationships with one another prior to the holiday. Among the 15, 12 are British, Brian and his brother are French, and Gordon is American. Donovan and Klaus, both 13 years old and cousins, hail from families of significant landowners in New Zealand's British colonies, and they are both in the 5th grade. Donovan is well-dressed and takes great care in his appearance. He is intelligent, eager to learn, and fiercely competitive, consistently achieving top grades. However, he has a penchant for posturing and enjoys overshadowing others. His long-standing rivalry with Brian has intensified due to Brian's superior reputation. Klaus, on the other hand, is an ordinary student who holds Donovan in high regard and follows his lead without question. Another classmate, Bacusta, also 13, is composed, enjoys helping others, and is quite skilled. His father is a small businessman. Wipe and Wire Kakusi are both 12 years old, 4th-grade students whose academic performance is neither outstanding nor poor. They are competitive, prone to fighting, and tend to disregard the advice of older students. Both hail from affluent families, as their fathers serve as Supreme Court justices. In the 3rd grade, there are Nito and Sabuz, also age 12. Nito's father is a retired naval officer, while Sabuz's father is a prominent businessman. The two families reside in the northern shores of Port Guatemala and share a close relationship, leading to a strong bond between the two boys. They harbor a disdain for labor, often complaining incessantly when tasked with work. Nito holds a deep admiration for the English novelist Daniel Defoe, frequently immersing himself in his literary works, which he often brings aboard the Sloggy. Sabuz, a mischievous child, dreams of embarking on adventurous journeys, reveling in tales such as Robinson Crusoe and Swiss Family Robinson. Jenkins and Iwason are both 9 years old. Jenkins is the son of the president of the New Zealand Scientific Association, while Iwason's father is a pastor in the Metropolitan Church. They are respectively in the 3rd and 2nd grades, excelling academically. 8-year-old Doyle and Costa, whose fathers are both officers in the New Zealand Army, reside in a place called Uchinaga, 6 miles from Auckland. They embody the essence of childhood, with Doyle occasionally throwing tantrums and Costa possessing a voracious appetite. Nevertheless, they excel in most other aspects. As first-grade students, their academic performance may not be remarkable, yet they are capable of reading and writing, and they take pride in their accomplishments. All of these children belong to respectable families settled in New Zealand. Among the 15 youths aboard the vessel Sloggy, there were 3 individuals, 2 from France and 1 from the United States. The American, Gordon, aged 14, is a remarkably composed child, exhibiting fairness in his dealings, albeit with somewhat sluggish movements. Among his 5th-grade peers, he stands out for his steadiness. His intellect may not rival that of Donnie Phan, yet he possesses a strong sense of justice and adaptability. Gordon's keen observational skills, coupled with his calm demeanor, enable him to approach tasks with diligence and caution. He meticulously analyzes issues in his mind before taking action, akin to the careful classification and record-keeping of items laid out on a table. Consequently, his classmates hold him in high regard and enjoy his company, despite him not being British. Born in Boston, America, Gordon was orphaned at a young age and raised by relatives. His guardian, a former consul in New Zealand, has since become a wealthy magnate. They reside in a well-appointed villa near St. John's Hill. The French boys, Brian and Jack, joined their family in New Zealand 3.5 years ago. Following Brian's father, a renowned engineer involved in the significant drainage and reclamation project at the NMUI Central Wetlands. Brian, though only 13, is exceptionally bright. Yet his academic performance has been lackluster, having once ranked last in his 5th grade examinations. Despite this, he remains remarkably talented, which is something that Donnie Phan finds intolerable. Their rivalry often leads to minor conflicts, which escalated into verbal disputes aboard the Sloggy. Brian is a valiant, adventurous soul with a passion for sports, possessing a robust physique and a genial demeanor. He is in no way pretentious like Donovan, nor does he take pleasure in ostentatious attire. He is a courageous and astute young man. This quality remains unchanged even when he commands the Sloggy. His maritime experience has only deepened through voyages from Europe to New Zealand. His younger brother, Jack, is notorious for his mischievous antics at Charman School, often engaging in pranks that have led to numerous disciplinary actions. However, since embarking on the Sloggy, an inexplicable transformation has taken place, rendering the traces of his former self nearly unrecognizable. The boys, who found themselves adrift on an unknown land in the Pacific due to a tempest, are comprised of such children. The Sloggy has traversed the coastline of New Zealand for several weeks, helmed by its owner and captain, the father of Neto, who was once among Australia's most intrepid mariners. This vessel has successfully navigated to New Caledonia, Australia, Morca, the Philippines, and the waters near Celebes. The Sloggy has also ventured into perilous seas, yet its sturdy construction assures safety in the face of storms. The crew includes a bosun, 6 sailors, a cook, and a 12-year-old apprentice sailor, a young black boy named Mike. Mike's family arrived in New Zealand long ago to serve a wealthy household. Additionally, there is an American breed dog aboard, a splendid hound belonging to Gordon, who remains faithfully by his master's side. The Sloggy is scheduled to set sail on February 15th. On the night of February 14th, before the key crew members had boarded, the young boys had already embarked on the vessel. Captain Neto would not appear until just before departure, accompanied by the bosun and an apprentice sailor, while the rest of the crew remained ashore, reveling in merriment. At that moment, the boys had already succumbed to slumber, prompting the bosun to join his comrades in their libations. The sailors indulged excessively, remaining on land until the late hours, leaving only the apprentice sailor, Mike, alone in the crew quarters. Upon awakening, Mike immediately sensed a precarious situation. The sailing vessel was swaying perilously upon the ocean. In haste, he dashed to the deck, only to be met with a shocking sight. The Sloggy was adrift on the water. His startled exclamation roused the slumbering boys on board. Gordon, Brian, and Donovan quickly sprang from their beds and rushed to the hatch, hoping to call for assistance. However, the surroundings revealed no signs of neighborhoods or harbors. The sailboat had been adrift at sea for nearly an hour. Yet, hope lingered, the possibility of encountering a ship bound for New Zealand. Despite the slim odds of such an occurrence, which were nearly non-existent, nevertheless, Mike was unwilling to forfeit this chance. He ascended to the top of the foremast and hoisted a signal light. Tragically, amidst the tumultuous rocking of the vessel, the rope suddenly snapped, sending the signal light plummeting into the depths. The sole indication of the Sloggy's existence had vanished, while a steamboat approached swiftly towards the drifting vessel. In the blink of an eye, 2 vessels brushed past each other. Had one of them collided directly, the Sloggy would undoubtedly have met its demise. Fortunately, it merely grazed the stern, shattering the nameplate affixed there. The impact was not severe enough for either crew to notice, and the steamboat, indifferent to the swaying Sloggy, continued its solitary journey. It is not uncommon for captains to hasten their escape after a collision, evading responsibility, a reprehensible act. The steamboat's departure, leaving behind the fragile sailboat it barely recognized, was a display of moral bankruptcy. As dawn broke, the vast expanse of the ocean revealed not a single vessel. This stretch of the Pacific is seldom traversed by ships. The boys aboard the Sloggy could no longer endure their maritime plight. They were at a loss for how to steer the sailboat and lacked the strength to hoist the sails. In this critical moment, Brian exhibited a rare bravery uncommon among youths. He began to direct the others in their self-rescue efforts, and even Donovan had no choice but to follow his lead. As previously mentioned, days after the Sloggy departed from port, a storm erupted at sea, persisting for 2 weeks and engulfing the entire surface. The fierce winds and towering waves constantly threatened the sailboat, ultimately casting the Sloughie onto this uncharted territory of the Pacific. After drifting 1,000 nautical miles, what fate now awaits the children aboard? Is there any hope for their survival? The relatives of the children must confront a brutally harsh reality. They have all been consumed by the sea, and this is no mere figment of imagination. On the night of February 14th in Auckland, New Zealand, following the mysterious disappearance of the vessel Sloughie, Captain Nito promptly informed the parents of the children involved. Such a significant event sent shockwaves throughout the city. Search and rescue operations commenced immediately in the harbor, with 2 small motorboats tirelessly scouring the waters several miles from the bay, day and night. The boats quickly combed through the surrounding marine areas, and due to the ship's name engraved on its hull, it was feared that the sailboat had been shattered by the waves and swallowed by the sea. Approximately 12 nautical miles off the New Zealand coast. Chapter 4. A desperate escape as Brian observed from the mast crossbeam. It was evident that there were no signs of life along the coastline. An hour prior, the sailboat had run aground on the beach, yet there was not a soul in sight. Our current dilemma, Brian stated, is that we possess food and ammunition, but we lack a place to take refuge. Indeed, Gordon concurred. First, let's ascertain our location, Brian continued. If this is the mainland, we may yet have hope for rescue. However, if it is an uninhabited island, well, we shall cross that bridge when we come to it. We need not delay any longer. Let us explore our surroundings. The two immediately ascended the cliffs to the open forested area between the river and the precipice. This was a primeval forest, with ancient, decaying trunks strewn across the ground, and the brittle leaves rose above the knees of Brian and Gordon. The sounds of their footsteps startled the birds perched in the trees. Thus, it appears that this coastline is evidently uninhabited. However, it seems that the nearby residents frequently visit this island. After a short distance, 2 young boys traversed the forest and arrived at the southern side, where numerous rocks lay scattered. The trees here were lush, and the cliffs towered at an average height of around 80 to 90 feet, standing like a protective screen. The ground was uneven, yet residing here was a form of enjoyment. Regrettably, Gordon and Brian found no caves amidst the towering rocks. The hull of their sailboat had already cracked, leaning perilously to port. This vessel was not their long-term refuge. Although the deck above the crew quarters was damaged, the dining area and the aft cabin still offered shelter from the elements, and the dining room remained intact, a source of great joy for the children, who regarded mealtime as the epitome of happiness. Fortunately, before the sailboat ran aground, Brian and his companions had not transported their essential supplies to the shore. Doing so would have been both cumbersome and laborious, had the Sloughie run aground beyond the reefs. Attempting to move their belongings to the shore would have been a grave mistake. Even if the sailboat had not sunk, how could the boys retrieve those invaluable necessities? Therefore, it was prudent to remain aboard the Sloughie for the time being. All the children descended from the deck to the cabin via the ship's rope ladder. Mike, an apprentice sailor skilled in cooking, was assisted by Sabuz, and together they promptly prepared a meal for everyone, who then devoured it with great enthusiasm. Wilcalcus suggested, "Let us venture to the northern rocks today and gather some edible bird eggs, shall we?" "Splendid, splendid," exclaimed Dole and Costa. "Let us see if there are any fish." Whip suddenly declared with enthusiasm, "We have plenty of fishing lines aboard. Our breakfast will consist of shellfish." Sabuz informed the children. "Indeed," Gordon replied, "friends, let us go together. Mike should join us as well." The apprentice sailor Mike was remarkably agile and courageous. His presence instilled a profound sense of safety among the young sailors. Jenkins, Dole, Costa, and Iwazen, under Mike's guidance, ventured to the beach to collect shellfish. After the children had departed, the older ones commenced the inventory of the ship's provisions. Donovan and his companions were tasked with accounting for the weapons, ammunition, clothing, luggage, and tools aboard. Meanwhile, Brian and his group diligently checked the stock of wine and whiskey. Gordon meticulously recorded all of this information in his notebook, displaying an unwavering diligence akin to the careful cataloging of assets. They first noted the existence of a complete spare set of sails and rigging. These items were of paramount importance. Although sailing was not an immediate option, they would undoubtedly require them upon their return to New Zealand. Additionally, the fishing gear was crucial, particularly if there were an abundance of fish along this coastline. In terms of weaponry, there are 8 shotguns, 1 bird gun, and a dozen handguns, a total of 300 bullets, along with 2 boxes of 25-pound ammunition, and a considerable quantity of lead shots and pellets, all initially prepared for hunting during a maritime voyage along the coast of New Zealand. Now, these provisions serve as a formidable support for the survival of the children on this deserted island. Naturally, in dire circumstances, it is preferable to refrain from resorting to firearms for the defense of life. In the storeroom, they also discovered fuses for nighttime communication, as well as dozens of cannonballs intended for the 2 small cannons aboard the Slaughter. There is an abundance of everyday necessities, sufficient for the youth aboard the sailboat to sustain themselves for an extended period. Despite some equipment being damaged when the vessel ran aground, the losses were minimal. No one knows how long they will reside here. Gordon's notes also record the presence of 2 barometers, 1 thermometer, 2 clocks, a megaphone for use in dense fog, 3 telescopes, 1 large compass, 2 small compasses, a long-range telescope, as well as the Union Jack and various small flags. Furthermore, there is a small inflatable boat that can be folded down to the size of a backpack, useful for crossing rivers or lakes. In the toolbox, there is a complete set of large tools, buttons, and sewing thread, which the boys' mothers had provided for them. Matches and flint are available, making fire starting both convenient and safe. The ship also contains detailed nautical charts, illustrating the topography of the islands along the New Zealand coast. At this moment, this map holds little utility for the stranded children. Fortunately, Gordon possesses a world map, compensating for the lack of navigational resources. In the ship's library, an array of remarkable books is available, including travelogues and scientific literature, alongside novels about Robinson Crusoe. Sabuz has taken a particular liking to the tales of Robinson, while Nito favors the works of Daniel Defoe. They eventually discovered writing materials, including notebooks, dip pens, pencils, ink, paper, and a calendar from 1860. Bacchus was assigned the task of turning the pages of the calendar, noting that anything prior to the 10th was of no use, and thus should be torn away. Within the ship's hold, a considerable amount of gold coins remained, seemingly useless at the moment, but perhaps of value in the future. Gordon meticulously inspected the barrels stacked in the ship's galley, which contained various wines. Some barrels had been cracked open when the vessel struck a reef, spilling their contents. Gordon and his companions transferred the remaining wine into undamaged barrels. Consequently, beneath the ship lay 400 to 500 liters of both red and sherry wine, 250 liters of gin, brandy, and whiskey, along with 40 barrels containing over 100 liters of pale ale. Additionally, there were 30 bottles of assorted liquors, all securely packaged and unbroken. These 15 unfortunate youths need not worry about survival for the time being. Their next priority is to ascertain whether food is available on this island. If it is indeed an island, even if ships pass nearby, no one is likely to come ashore to rescue them. They could be trapped here indefinitely. None among them possess the skills to repair the ship, yet they must strive to do so. The 2 lifeboats originally aboard were long ago swept away by the storm, leaving only a miscellaneous vessel suitable for coastal navigation. Splendid, Brian exclaimed. We have yet another dish. What a delightful idea, Gordon responded, just as Tony Van is eager to hunt. Excellent, the 3 youths chorused. However, Brian cautioned, let us refrain from excessive hunting. We should only take what we need and, ideally, avoid wasting ammunition. In the afternoon, they busied themselves with repairing the boat and organizing their belongings. Jenkins and the children ventured to the riverbank for fishing. After dinner, everyone retired early, with Bacusta and Wilcox on duty for the night, which passed without incident. Thus, the youths peacefully endured 2 nights on this Pacific land. These 15 young souls, having drifted through this desolate corner of the earth, seemed to have acquired a measure of experience. Despite their dire circumstances, the clever and brave boys persevered with unwavering resolve. Chapter 5. The Expedition. What indeed is this place? Brian, Gordon, and Tony Van pondered this significant question. It is now clear that this land, whether a continent or an island, is not tropical. A glance at the dense trees along the riverbank, beech, birch, alder, pine, and fir, reveals this, for such flora does not exist in the Central Pacific. The region lies at a higher latitude than New Zealand, seemingly close to the Antarctic. What is concerning is the prospect of a very cold winter. In the forest beneath the cliffs, a thick layer of fallen leaves blankets the ground, with only the pines and firs retaining their foliage. The boys resided on the sailboat for 2 days, and Gordon remarked, staying here is not a sustainable solution. Indeed, Donovan concurred, stating that if we do not abandon the ship before the onset of the harsh cold and rainy season, it will be too late. Even so, Brian countered, it is certainly preferable to aimlessly flounder about like headless flies. What do you mean by that? Who resembles a headless fly? Donovan retorted angrily. Gordon hastily intervened, urging both to unite for their survival. Shall we venture to the northern side of the bay? If we can reach the northern cape, we could see far and wide, suggested Brian. However, this exploratory plan was not realized over the subsequent 5 days. The weather, fickle as it is, turned and began to drizzle, while the wind turned frigid, casting dark clouds across the horizon and impairing visibility. Despite the inclement weather, the days were not squandered. They accomplished much of value. Brian, in a fatherly manner, showed tender care and encouragement towards the younger ones. As the temperature continued to drop, he instructed the children to don all the clothing available aboard the vessel. The children, eager and industrious, led by Granetto and Barista, ventured to the shoreline during low tide to collect shells, employing nets and fishing lines to catch fish in the river. Not only did they gather a bountiful harvest, but they also reveled in their playful pursuits, transforming their existence into one of joy and fulfillment. Certainly, they sometimes miss their parents and feel a sense of dread about their predicament. It is essential not to burden the young ones with such harsh realities. Gordon and Brian are particularly attentive to this matter, showing great concern for the children. Sabuz often joins them, appearing quite spirited and capable of assisting with various tasks. He has a fondness for Brian and prefers his company over that of Donovan, who also shares a strong affection for him. Splendid, Sabuz exclaimed repeatedly, relieved that the slough had not sustained any damage and was able to land safely. As for Robinson, their fortunes were no better than ours. Brian was deeply troubled by the sudden change in Jack. Ever since the slough had been adrift at sea, Jack's demeanor mirrored that of a remorseful child, filled with regret. Had he committed some error? On several occasions, for reasons unknown, he quietly shed tears in secluded corners. Yet, when Brian inquired about it, Jack merely replied, "It's nothing, brother." Brian felt it best not to press further. From March 11th to March 15th, Donovan, Wilkowski, Whip, and Klaus engaged in catching birds among the rocky nests. The four of them were inseparable in their endeavors, evidently forming a little clique. Gordon harbored great concerns about the situation. Whenever the opportunity arose, he would engage Donovan in conversation, hoping that Donovan would prioritize the greater good and refrain from undermining their unity. He expressed to them that the most pressing matter at hand was overcoming their challenges. However, particularly with Donovan, his counsel fell on deaf ears, leading Gordon to cease his efforts of persuasion. The group was fervently eager to reach the promontory, to ascertain whether this land was part of the mainland or an isolated isle, as this determination would shape their future. On March 15th, the weather improved significantly, rendering the expedition feasible. By nightfall, the dense fog had lifted, revealing the sky, and the radiant sunlight illuminated the cliff's summit with extraordinary brilliance. In the afternoon, the slanting rays allowed for a clear view of the eastern horizon. Should the horizon connect with the coastline, it would unequivocally indicate that this land was an island, leaving them reliant solely on passing vessels for rescue. The following morning, Brian rose early, setting off before the others had awakened, to guard against unforeseen circumstances. He equipped himself with a pistol and a stick, along with essential supplies for the ascent to the promontory. Brian strode purposefully along the coast, covering a distance greater than that traversed by Donovan and Weep while chasing rock pigeons. The weather indeed proved favorable. However, should a thin mist arise from the east in the afternoon, their expedition would be rendered futile. In the initial hour, Brian pressed on unceasingly, moving swiftly, and if all proceeded as planned, he anticipated reaching the promontory by 8 a.m. The cliff by the sea is exceedingly narrow, making traversal quite inconvenient. Brian must ascend the slippery rocks, treading upon the sticky seaweed and wading through puddles, with the path becoming increasingly arduous, thus consuming a considerable amount of time. He murmurs anxiously to himself that he might not reach the strait before high tide. This brave young lad, despite his legs aching with fatigue, refuses to allow himself a moment's respite. He removes his shoes and socks, laboriously advancing through the knee-deep water, skillfully navigating the rocks to prevent himself from falling into the sea. Brian deduces from the sea leopard's utter lack of wariness towards humans that this area has likely not witnessed human hunting for many years. Furthermore, the abundance of sea leopards suggests that this coastline is situated in the south, indicating that the sailboat must be drifting southeast across the Pacific Ocean. His hypothesis is solidified when he finally reaches the Cape and beholds a vast congregation of penguins, a sight typically reserved for the Antarctic region. At this moment, it is 10 a.m. Brian feels fatigued and hungry, realizing he must rest briefly before ascending the Cape. For the climb from the ground to the summit exceeds 300 feet in height. After just an hour of repose, he regains his vigor, reattaches his waist pouch, and begins his ascent. The geology here is unique, resembling crystalline formations resulting from subterranean eruptions. The hills appear distinctly different from what he observed from afar, lacking the usual alignment of rocks. Brian's climbing skills prove commendable. He navigates numerous perils with remarkable agility, ultimately reaching the pinnacle of the cliff. He raised the telescope and gazed eastward, where vast plains unfolded before him, with the cliffs towering the highest. Peering further inland, the terrain gradually descended into low-lying areas, adorned with lush green forests, through which a river meandered. The expanse of the plains spanned approximately 10 square miles, leaving the surrounding environment shrouded in uncertainty. To ascertain whether this was a continent or an island, he would need to venture further east, deeper into the heartland. The coastline stretched northward for several miles, seemingly endless, accompanied by a long promontory where the landscape undulated like sandy beaches or creek beds. To the south, beyond the bay, facing the sharp sea point, lay a damp marshland extending from the northeast to the southwest. Brian scrutinized the vista through his telescope, pondering whether this was a continent or an island, an answer that remained elusive. In any case, if it were indeed an island, it must be a substantial one. That was all he could surmise for now. Then, he turned his attention westward, where the boundless ocean sprawled. Suddenly, a spark of excitement ignited within him as he spotted something through the telescope. A ship, he exclaimed joyfully to himself. There were vessels. Indeed, on the horizon, 15 miles away, 3 small black dots emerged. Could they be ships? They certainly resembled vessels, yet he could not discern any masts or smoke billowing from them. Steamships do not emit smoke while traversing the sea. As he focused on the 3 black dots, realization dawned upon him. They were, in fact, 3 small islands. The slaughter had drifted along the coastline during the storm, surely passing by those islands, obscured by the dense fog that had enveloped everything at that time. A wave of disappointment washed over Brian. What lies beyond? He scrutinized the scene more intently and exclaimed, "It is the sea. Indeed, it is the sea." He ceased his observations. Today's labor had come to a close. With newfound clarity, he realized that to the east stretched the vast expanse of the ocean. The site where the Sloggy had drifted ashore was not a continent, but an island, a solitary isle far removed from the Pacific. At this moment, Brian felt a palpable sense of peril, yet he remained undeterred, believing that the chance of survival still lingered. Chapter 6. Preparations for the expedition after supper. Brian conveyed the findings of the exploration to his companions. Facing the forest to the east, the waterline was distinctly visible, running from north to south. Undoubtedly the horizon of the sea. Thus, it was concluded that this place was an island and not a continent. Initially, Gordon and the others were taken aback by Brian's words. Unable to fathom the reality of the situation, they could hardly believe that it was indeed an island. Did this imply that escape was impossible? They could not simply resign themselves to fate. They must venture eastward in search of a route to the mainland. For there was no other recourse but to wait for a vessel to pass through the distant waters. Had Brian perhaps misjudged the situation? Donovan inquired. "What is the distance?" Wolkaskus asked. "It is 6 miles from the Cape." "And what lies opposite?" Whip questioned. "Was there no land?" "None at all. There was nothing." Donovan deliberately challenged Brian, suggesting that perhaps Brian had misjudged the situation, for seeing is believing, while hearing can often deceive. "Let us set out tomorrow," Gordon suggested, "as we find ourselves in a rather precarious situation, and it is imperative that we ascertain the specifics of our surroundings to our advantage." The following day, a moderate rain began to fall, its cessation uncertain. On March 27th, a significant catch was made, and the day was filled with amusing incidents. In the afternoon, as the rain ceased, the children eagerly gathered their fishing gear and ventured to the river. Suddenly, joyous shouts erupted from the riverbank, accompanied by the children's excited screams. "The only solution," Gordon asserted, "is to turn it over." "But how can we do that?" Sabuz inquired, perplexed. "Stop joking. It must weigh at least 300 pounds. March swiftly passed by. Since the wreck of the Strawy 3 weeks prior, everyone had come to accept that residing on this island for a while was inevitable. prompting the children to strive to engage in various activities. As the bitter cold of winter had yet to arrive, the pressing question of whether they were on a continent or an island remained unresolved. On April 1st, the weather improved, promising several days of favorable conditions, allowing for deeper exploration of the island. "Tomorrow will be the day," Donovan declared. "We shall embark on our adventure then." They made all necessary preparations, ensuring their food supplies could last 4 days, while the youths equipped themselves with rifles, pistols, 2 axes, a compass pouch, a large telescope, travel blankets, flint, and matches, sufficient provisions for their journey. Due to safety concerns, Brian and Donovan led Sabuz and Wilcox, maintaining a close connection among themselves, ensuring they would not stray apart. The sun descended into the sea, and darkness enveloped the land. As night fell, the stars emerged in the sky. Gordon and his companions felt a profound sadness at the thought of parting ways with Brian and the others the following day. He was reluctant to see his comrades leave him. Gazing up at the starry sky, their hearts soared towards their parents, their homes, and perhaps to a homeland they might never see again. At that moment, the children knelt before the Southern Cross, much like facing the crucifix in a church, silently praying, while the youths remained oblivious to the unpredictable changes that awaited them the next day. Chapter 7. The Second Expedition. At dawn, Brian, Donovan, Wilcox, and Sabuz set forth from the vessel, the Sloggy. The sky was clear, and the weather splendid. Initially, they walked towards the cliffs, heeding Gordon's advice to bring along the hunting dogs. After a brief journey, they entered the forest and swiftly traversed it. They resolved to follow the cliff's edge towards the northern point of the bay. Though this route was not the shortest, it was the most reliable path they had determined, and an additional mile or two was insignificant for Brian and his companions. They advanced briskly, drawing ever closer to the cape. Brian began to harbor doubts about the viability of this path. Time was fleeting, and the tide would soon rise upon the shore. If that were to occur, their half-day's effort would be in vain. Brian remarked, "We cannot afford to rush. Where's Sabuz?" He immediately called out Sabuz's name. "Sabuz. Sabuz." Brian, Donovan, and Wilkes swiftly followed the sound. Sabuz stood at the edge of a cracked cliff, and Donovan was the first to ascend the perilous rocks. "Don't go up," Brian shouted. Ignoring Brian's warning, Donovan, ever arrogant in front of others, sprinted up and reached the cliff's summit, with the other 3 following suit shortly thereafter. As soon as Donovan climbed to the top, he took out his binoculars and began to survey the surroundings. To the east lay a dense forest. "What do you see?" Wilkes inquired. "Nothing at all," Donovan replied. "I am not deceiving you. This cliff is lower than the cape. Beyond this plateau, if we traverse that forest and continue onward." "Good," Donovan exclaimed. "If we follow this route, we will certainly cover considerable distance." "You aren't trying to lead us astray, are you?" "What do you mean by that?" Brian retorted. "You all wait here, Sabuz and I will go. Let us rest a moment before proceeding," Sabuz suggested. They spent half an hour for lunch before setting off on foot. Initially, their pace was swift, and walking through the overgrown terrain brought them joy. However, as Brian and the others crossed the plateau and reached the opposite side of the cliff, they found the journey increasingly arduous. Upon entering the forest, the path became treacherous. Fallen trees obstructed their way, and they could only advance by clearing the dense underbrush. The youths, undeterred by adversity, hewed a path through the dense forest with their axes. Exhaustion weighed heavily upon them, their arms weary and unable to rise further, yet they persisted in their relentless labor, utterly fatigued. Their progress was painfully slow as dusk descended. They had only managed to advance a mere 3 or 4 miles. This was a primordial forest, untouched by human presence, with no footprints discernible along the narrow, winding trail. Numerous dead and decaying trees lay scattered about, while others, fearing the height they had attained, had broken branches under the duress of the wind. Patches of trampled grass bore witness to the passage of wildlife. Their second respite occurred at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, beside a crystal-clear brook. The water, devoid of fallen twigs and leaves, suggested that the stream's source was nearby. They could easily traverse the brook by stepping on the stones and pebbles scattered within. Not only were the stones smooth, but their arrangement also appeared remarkably orderly. "How curious!" exclaimed Donovan. "The stones in this brook are aligned as if they form a pathway. It's almost like a riverbank." Sabbath cautiously stepped across the stones towards the opposite shore. "Let's not rush our journey," Brian interjected. "We ought to study the arrangement of these stones. It would be quite a feat for a single person to arrange them in such a manner," Wilcox added. "Indeed, Brian concurred. Who has constructed this passageway here? Pay close attention. The group gathered at the riverbank, intently scrutinizing the stones, partially exposed above the water's surface. It was evident that during the rainy season, these stones would likely be submerged. In the event of a significant flood, with turbulent waters rushing by, they could very well transform into a natural embankment. The small river flows northeast, contrary to the direction of the bay. Could it possibly lead to the vast sea that Brian glimpsed from the top of the cape? Brian and his three companions cautiously navigated the stones within the river, finding it far easier than traversing the shoreline. By 5 in the afternoon, Brian and Donovan discovered that the brook flowed northward, which struck them as utterly astonishing. If they continued in this manner, they would drift further away. They departed from the riverbank, traversing through the forest towards the east. The path became increasingly arduous, with the underbrush towering above their heads, compelling them to scatter and call out to one another. After a day's journey, the ocean remained elusive, and doubt began to creep into Brian's mind. Was the horizon he had seen from the cape merely an illusion? Surely not, he reassured himself. He had not been mistaken, it could not be. By around 7 in the evening, they were still wandering through the woods, and as darkness enveloped the land, they could advance no further. After a brief discussion, they resolved to camp beneath the trees. They consumed some provisions to satiate their hunger, wrapped themselves in blankets for warmth, and ignited dry twigs to ward off potential animal attacks. They harbored concerns about the presence of indigenous people, which could spell trouble. As they neared slumber, Sabuz noticed an unusually lush grove nearby. Peering through the gaps in the trees, he spotted a cluster of not-so-tall trees not far off, their lower branches reaching toward the ground. The youths settled upon the dry leaves of the shorter trees, enveloped in their blankets for the night. When Brian and his companions awoke, it was already 7 o'clock the following morning. Sabuz was the first to delve into the thicket, weaving through the dense foliage, when suddenly he let out a cry. "Friends, come quickly. Hurry. What has transpired?" Brian inquired. "Come, let us examine our sleeping quarters," Sabuz exclaimed. It became evident that they were not amidst a lavish expanse of foliage, but rather within a humble abode meticulously constructed by Native Americans from leaves, colloquially known as an akipa. This akipa, while not particularly ancient, exhibited a rather fragile structure. "Is anyone residing here?" Donovan anxiously glanced around. "Splendid," Sabuz declared. "If there are inhabitants, they must surely be good-hearted. At last, we shall no longer be isolated and defenseless." The benevolence of the indigenous people remained uncertain. If this place was connected to the New World, then the inhabitants would undoubtedly be Native Americans. However, if they found themselves on an island in the Pacific, inhabited by Polynesian cannibals, the situation could prove perilous. Brian ventured outside, while Donovan meticulously inspected the interior of the hut. He cautiously turned over the dried leaves that served as their makeshift bedding. Sabuz, meanwhile, retrieved a clay pot from beneath, a vessel crafted solely by human hands, which brought him a sense of solace. Beyond this modest dwelling, little else could be discerned, and ultimately, the group emerged from the hut. Beginning at 7:30, guided by their compass, Brian and his companions journeyed eastward through the dense, verdant forest, a trek that consumed 2 hours. As they approached 10 o'clock, they finally emerged from the woodland, greeted by expansive meadows adorned with frankincense trees, musk herbs, and a myriad of other flora. Half a mile to the east, the vast ocean that Brian had last witnessed emerged, its waves tumultuously crashing towards the shore. Facing the sea, Donovan found himself at a loss for words, compelled to concede that Brian's assertions were indeed correct. Yet, Brian did not display any semblance of triumph. Instead, he held a telescope, meticulously observing the surface of the water. The reality was now undeniable. This was not a continent, but an island, and they could only await the prospect of external rescue, completely dispelling any thoughts of escape from this place. The 4 youths traversed the fields and rested at the foot of the sand dunes. They resolved to have their lunch first, and then devise a plan to traverse the forest back, aiming to return to the slough before dusk. During the meal, a profound silence enveloped them. Eventually, it was Donovan who broke the stillness, packing up their belongings and announcing, "Let us be on our way." The 4 cast one last glance at the ocean before turning towards the forest. At that moment, a dog dashed towards the sea, bounding into the water, and immediately began to drink heartily. Donovan crossed the beach, cupping the water the dog had just consumed in his hands, and taking a sip. He exclaimed, "It's fresh water. This is a vast lake, not the sea." Chapter 8. The habitation cave. The debate over whether this place was a continent or an island lingered without resolution. What was initially presumed to be the ocean had now been confirmed as a lake. However, this might not be a lake typical of an island. One thing was certain. It was a considerable body of water, as it connected with the horizon on three sides, suggesting it might not be a continental lake after all. Our predicament, however, remains quite dire, Brian remarked. My thoughts are correct. This is an undeniable truth, declared Donovan. Regardless, what I perceive is water. However, it is certainly not the sea. The continuation of our expedition serves another purpose, to ascertain whether any inhabitants reside in this vicinity. The neatly arranged stepping stones in the brook, along with the relatively modern equipa, serve as compelling evidence. Perhaps this adventure will yield unforeseen discoveries. A dispute arose regarding the direction of our exploration, with a suggestion to head south, closer to the slouchy vessel. Ultimately, they opted for this course, and thus, the four of them set forth at 8 in the morning. Throughout their journey, no signs of indigenous habitation were evident. The woods offered no wafting smoke. Nor did they catch sight of sails or wooden boats upon the lake's surface, and there were no wild beasts to be found in the forest. After dinner, Brian and his companions retired early, as this area lacked the familiar equipa huts, forcing them to camp under the stars. They enjoyed a peaceful night. Brian was the first to awaken, soon followed by Donovan and the others. While Sabuz was still chewing on some biscuits, Brian, Donovan, and Wilkes ventured near the riverbed. Wilkes exclaimed, "Fortunately, we did not cross last night. The opposite bank leads to marshland." The river's right bank, approximately 20 yards wide, extended down to the cliffs. The left bank was low and offered poor visibility. The expansive marshland to the south obscured the river's course, necessitating a climb to the cliff's summit for clarity. As Brian sought to comprehend the surrounding conditions, he approached the base of the cliff when Wilkes suddenly shouted, "Look! Over there!" What Wilkowski beheld were stones heaped up like a riverbank. "Surely, someone has been here," Brian remarked. "Indeed," Donovan replied, pointing to the wooden fragments beneath the riverbank. "That piece appears to have fallen from a ship. One fragment, shaped like a pillar, is decayed and bears traces of fire, its curved form reminiscent of shipbuilding materials, adorned with rusted iron rings." "Iron rings. Indeed, iron rings," Sabuz exclaimed in astonishment. The group surveyed their surroundings, as if expecting those who had once sailed this vessel and constructed the riverbank to materialize before them. After a prolonged gaze, none appeared. This ship had been abandoned by the river for at least a decade. At that moment, the dog became alert, as if it had caught a scent. Its ears perked up, tail wagging incessantly, and its nose probing the grass, desperately sniffing the aroma of the earth. "What is the hound doing?" Sabuz inquired. "What does it smell?" Donovan said, moving closer to the hound. The hunting dog lifted a leg, standing there with its face raised, suddenly darting towards the thicket below the cliff. Brian and the others hastily followed, and soon they halted before an ancient beech tree, its bark inscribed with 2 letters and a year, FB 1807. "There is something amiss," Brian declared, gathering the group together, urging vigilance. "We must be cautious. A band of natives may be lurking nearby. If they are the Indian raiders of the Argentine pampas, we must exercise even greater caution." They pushed the rifle cartridges into the chamber, clutching their handguns, ready to defend themselves at the slightest indication of danger. Subsequently, the youths advanced, rounding the bend and emerging from the narrow riverbank. After taking merely 20 steps, Donovan's foot encountered an object. It was a rusted pickaxe, still bearing the remnants of its head, not a crude tool crafted by Polynesian natives, but rather an artifact brought from the Americas or Europe. As obsolete as the iron ring aboard the vessel, surely discarded here many years prior. Below the cliff lay fields, now entirely abandoned dry land. Suddenly, the sound of hunting dogs pierced the air, and then appeared Van, displaying an unusual exuberance, circling around the youths, racing before them, gazing into their faces and barking, as if he had made a significant discovery. Something was certainly amiss. "Look," Brian remarked, attempting to soothe the dog with gentle strokes, though to no avail. "Let us go investigate." Donovan signaled to Wilkowski and Sabuz. Having not ventured far, Van halted before the thicket, where branches hung low to the cliff's base. Brian, suspecting the presence of either animal or human remains within the underbrush, rushed ahead of Donovan and the others, parting the foliage with his hands, only to reveal a narrow cave. "A cave?" he exclaimed, stepping back. "You'll find out," Brian replied. Without hesitation, they set to work. using an axe to clear the symmetrically grown branches at the entrance, listening intently, yet perceiving no unusual sounds. Sabuz couldn't contain his eagerness to delve into the cave, but Brian suggested, let Van enter first to scout. The hounds merely barked at the mouth of the cavern. Should any creature be concealed within, the slightest disturbance would surely prompt it to flee, and it was imperative to discern its appearance. Brian ignited a bundle of hay and cast it into the cave. The flames blazed brightly, yet no peculiar odor pervaded the air. Let us proceed inside, exclaimed Wilcox. Wait, we must first procure a torch, Brian replied. He severed several resinous branches from the riverside trees, igniting them, and the group advanced into the cave, brandishing the flaming pine boughs. The entrance stood 5 feet high and approximately 2 feet wide, but upon entering, the space expanded dramatically, reaching a height of 10 feet and a width of around 20 feet, with the ground strewn with sand. As soon as they stepped inside, Wilcox collided with a stool. Beside it rested a rudimentary table adorned with a water jug fashioned from shells, a rusted knife, 2 or 3 sewing needles, and several cups. Against the opposite wall lay a crude wooden chest, which contained decayed garments. Undoubtedly, this cave had once been inhabited. When and by whom? On the crooked bed within, tattered mats were strewn, and Brian and the others pondered whether the mats concealed the remains of the deceased. They recoiled in fright. Brian steeled himself, then abruptly lifted the mats. Beneath them lay nothing but emptiness. Brian and his companions found the cave to be utterly terrifying. The 4 of them hurriedly made their way outside, while the hunting dog continued to bark at the cave's entrance. After walking 20 paces along the riverbank, they suddenly halted, confronted by an even more horrifying sight. Scattered among the dense underbrush were the skeletal remains of a human. These bones undoubtedly belonged to the enigmatic individual who had inhabited this cave years ago. Tragically, this person met a wretched end, perishing not within the cave's emptiness but amidst the thicket. Chapter 9. Returned to the ship, none of the 4 spoke a word. What manner of person had died here? Was he a shipwrecked sailor who had not been rescued until his final moments? From which nation did he hail? Had he spent his entire life in this desolate place? How had he survived here? If he was indeed a victim of a shipwreck, were there others who had lived to tell the tale? Were the items found in the cave salvaged from the ship, or had he crafted them himself? Regardless, a thorough examination of the cave was imperative. Perhaps it would reveal more about the deceased and determine whether the boys could endure the winter within these walls. Let us proceed and explore further, Brian declared. They re-entered the cave, and their attention was immediately drawn to a makeshift shelf constructed against the right wall, upon which sat crude candles fashioned from oil and hemp twine. Sabuz carefully lit one of the candles, and the 4 began their meticulous investigation of the cave. Beginning from within the cave, the entrance boasts excellent ventilation, ensuring that the interior remains devoid of any dampness. The sea breeze cannot penetrate, and although sunlight does not reach inside, it would not pose a problem to create 1 or 2 additional openings in the walls, accommodating a dozen or so inhabitants comfortably. The cave's dimensions are inherently limited. If designated for sleeping quarters, a dining area, storage, and a kitchen, it would become exceedingly cramped, with winters extending for 5 to 6 months. Should they contemplate a prolonged stay, expanding the space would be advisable. After ascertaining the cave's size, Brian commenced inspecting the items within. Unfortunately, nothing of value emerged, rendering the existing belongings unusable. Brian remarked to Donovan and the others that, in comparison to this unfortunate individual, their possessions should suffice. The group concurred with this sentiment. Shortly thereafter, they made new discoveries: a broken knife, a water jug, and a sailor's rope coiler, yet no telescope, compass, or rifle could be found. They speculated that this individual must have dug hunting traps to survive, and a realization swiftly dawned upon them when Wilcox exclaimed, "Come and see." "What is it?" Sabuz inquired. "Perhaps it's for playing marbles." Wilcox jested. "Marbles?" Brian was taken aback. Wilcox picked up 2 round stones, and Brian immediately recognized their purpose. They were tools for hunting, designed to be tethered with fine cord, aimed at prey, and accurately thrown. When the stones struck the legs of the quarry, the injury would prevent it from escaping. Undoubtedly, this hunting tool was crafted by the deceased during their lifetime, accompanied by a rope designed for capturing nearby animals, intricately fashioned from long strips of leather. In stark contrast to these rudimentary items, Brian and his companions felt immensely fortunate to possess a plethora of living essentials. As Brian began to inspect the bedding, Wilcox discovered a pocket watch hanging from a nail on the wall. This exquisite timepiece, with its silver casing and chain, commanded attention. "Look at the time," Wilcox exclaimed. "There's no use in checking the time," Brian retorted, suggesting that the watch may have ceased to function long before the individual's demise. The watch cover was rusted. Yet Brian managed to pry it open, revealing the hands pointing to 327. There should be an inscription on the watch, he mused, peering closer, and indeed, a name was etched upon it. St. Malin, Del Bush, read the inscription, identifying the maker. "Good heavens, a Frenchman!" Brian cried out in excitement. Subsequently, they stumbled upon another item. Donovan shifted the bed and noticed a notebook discarded on the floor. Its pages were yellowed with age, and regrettably, the handwriting was challenging to decipher. Only a few words remained legible, and Donovan managed to spell out Voyages, which matched the initials F.B. carved into the beech tree. This notebook chronicled the struggles for survival of the deceased in this desolate place. Brian too deciphered several words. To get Rouen, undoubtedly the name of the ill-fated vessel. On the first page, the date inscribed corresponds with the time marked on the tree, indicating the moment of the shipwreck. Thus, it has been 53 years since Voyages drifted to this place, with no rescue in sight during all this time. It is only now that Brian and his companions realize the perilous nature of their situation. Even the seasoned sailors struggle to survive here. What then can be expected of these children? Another revelation indicates that their chances of escaping this place are nearly non-existent. Donovan opened his notebook and discovered a piece of paper, resembling a map. "It is indeed a map," Donovan exclaimed. "It appears to have been drawn by Voyages himself," Brian explained. The map meticulously illustrates Sloggy Bay, the reefs, the lake they had just traversed, 3 small islands on the sea, the continuous cliffs along the riverbank, and the vast forest at the island's center. Donovan's conclusion was hasty, yet Brian's assessment proved accurate. This was indeed an island, rendering it impossible for Voden to have escaped this desolate isle alone. The map drawn by Voden clearly delineates the island's topography, albeit the distances measured in steps rather than triangulation. Brian and Donovan compared their observations and found no discrepancies. The highest point of the island appears to be a continuous cliff stretching from the cape to the right bank of the river, with a sandy expanse to the north, a broad marshland across the river, and elongated dunes to the northeast and southeast. They scrutinized the map once more and discovered that the island extended approximately 50 miles from north to south and about 25 miles from east to west. This isolated isle, nestled in the heart of the Pacific, was nowhere to be found. It appeared that Brian and his companions would have to reside here for an extended period. The cave served as an ideal concealment. Thus, it would be prudent to transfer their belongings from the ship into the cave before the frigid winter winds wreaked havoc upon the vessel. As twilight approached, navigating beneath the juniper trees, pines, and shrubs became increasingly arduous. Night fell entirely, and a sense of disorientation enveloped them. Would they have to spend the night beneath the trees? Their provisions had long been exhausted, and hunger gnawed at them intolerably. "Let us press on," Brian urged. "If we persist in our westward journey, we shall surely reach the ship." However, Donovan interjected, "Is it not possible that the map may be flawed?" Doubts began to creep into Donovan's mind regarding the map drawn by the deceased. Brian, unwilling to engage in further debate, resolutely continued onward, and the group followed suit, striding forward with determination. By 8 p.m., the darkness had deepened to the point where visibility was utterly obscured, and they found themselves unable to escape the forest. Suddenly, a brilliant light pierced through the thicket. "Is it a meteor?" inquired Wilkowskis. "No, it's a signal flare emanating from the direction of Sloggy Bay," Brian replied. "It must be Gordon and the others," Donovan exclaimed, immediately discharging his firearm in response. Chapter 10. Constructing a raft. Gordon and his companions were eager to hear the outcome of the expedition, yet Brian, Donovan, and the others were simply too fatigued to converse. Their revelations would have to wait until the morrow. "This is indeed an island," was all that Brian managed to utter. Everyone immediately understood that a life of hardship had just begun. However, Gordon did not exhibit any signs of despair upon hearing this. As I had anticipated, he gently uttered a few words. Regardless of what the future may hold, it is Gordon who remains the calmest. This American youth, without a home in New Zealand, felt no apprehension in sharing this space with everyone. He encouraged them by stating that if they all supported one another, they could thrive here. After hearing his words, the group's spirits were rejuvenated. "We should move to the cave we discovered. It is relatively safe," Brian suggested. Time is of the essence, Gordon concurred. The sailboat cannot endure much more turmoil. If it is battered by the storm again, it would not last for several hours. Simply transferring the items from the boat was insufficient. They needed to dismantle the vessel and salvage all valuable materials for repairing the cave, which the children had named Frankie Dan in memory of the unfortunate Frenchman. Where shall we move now? Where will we reside? Donnie inquired. That is an excellent plan. Let us act swiftly and commence immediately. We shall use the sail to construct a makeshift tent and evacuate our belongings before the hull splits apart. By around April 15th, the children had successfully removed all items from the boat. On the 25th, a fierce storm struck, and the slouchy was dismantled by the winds. In the following 3 days, the children also transported the planks to the riverbank. Now is the time to construct a raft, Gordon proclaimed. Indeed, Bacusta remarked. It is rather cumbersome to transport the raft after its construction. Why not simply construct it in the river? But how could one possibly do that? Donovan countered. What a splendid idea. Let us build it right in the river. Gordon exclaimed. Although it may present some inconveniences, it certainly alleviates the burden of transportation. On the following night, illuminated by a brilliant moonlight, the children diligently toiled. They arranged the timber dismantled from the boat and hammered in the nails, fashioning a raft measuring 10 feet in length and 15 feet in width. Though the task was accomplished swiftly, it consumed a total of 3 days. We must set off on May 6th, Brian declared. With the new moon rising tomorrow, in a couple of days, the tide will swell. If the waters rise sufficiently, we can navigate upstream. With everyone pulling from the front and pushing from the rear, we shall make progress with the raft. Indeed, there are still 3 days remaining until May 6th, Gordon noted. On May 5th, they commenced transferring their belongings onto the boat. By the end of that day, everything was loaded onto the raft, awaiting the untying of the anchor line. They planned to set sail around 8 a.m. the following morning, as the tide came in. The youths were preparing to rest peacefully when Gordon interjected, There is still one crucial task to attend to. Friends, once we depart this bay, the vast ocean will be beyond our sight. Even if a ship passes by, there will be no signals visible. Therefore, it is essential to erect a mast on the cliff and hoist a flag, ensuring that vessels passing nearby can see it. Though fatigue weighed heavily upon them, they worked joyously. After Bacusta hoisted the Union Jack, Donovan celebrated the successful raising of the flag with a salute from a cannon. On May 6th, everyone arose early, dismantling the canvas tents and placing them atop the luggage on the raft, thus alleviating any concerns regarding the capriciousness of the weather. By 7 a.m., all preparations were complete. As fire could not be kindled on the raft, Mike had meticulously arranged the provisions. At 8:30, each individual had secured their position on the raft, with the children grasping poles and paddles, standing at the edges. As the tide began to rise at 9 a.m., the raft creaked ominously. Raise anchor, Brian shouted. The heavy raft was lifted, and jubilance erupted among the crew, who were exceedingly pleased with their handcrafted vessel. The raft progressed at a languid pace, and around 11 a.m., as the tide receded, they hastily secured the raft to the shore. Aware that the tide would rise again by evening, yet navigating in darkness posed a perilous threat. However, Gordon remarked that even if they arrived late, there would be a safe way to proceed. Consequently, the entire afternoon and evening were spent in idleness. Donovan and several hunting enthusiasts disembarked from the right bank with hunting dogs, successfully capturing plump wild geese and numerous quails. Mike suggested that these captures serve as their initial sustenance upon arrival at Frankie Dan, and he diligently tended to them. That evening, Bacusta, Whip, and Klaus took turns keeping watch over the raft. The night was eerily silent, with a chill breeze sweeping through and the waters swelling all around. Everyone huddled beneath the sail, not feeling excessively cold, though Jenkins and Iverson complained, suggesting it would have been preferable to remain aboard the Sloggy. Brian encouraged them repeatedly to uplift their spirits. On the afternoon of May 8th, at 3 o'clock, the water finally began to rise. The raft steadily advanced towards the visible expanse of the lake, arriving at the foot of Franch Dan's cliff, where they secured the raft. Chapter 11. Residing in the cave, the younger children exuberantly disembarked, their spirits lifted by the transformative changes in their lives. Akin to the excitement of a new game, lighthearted and novel, Dorby was the most elated, frolicking along the shore. At that moment, Brian inquired of Jack, "Why aren't you joining everyone in play? A bit of movement would do you well. Are you troubled by something? Or perhaps unwell?" Given that they were to spend the night at Franch Dan, They needed to hasten their efforts to transport their belongings ashore. Brian, ever the thoughtful one, considered that since they had just arrived, it would be prudent to lead his companions to explore the cave. They secured the raft to the shore before following Brian towards Franch Dan, with Mike trailing closely behind, carrying a lantern. First, they had to clear the entrance. The branches they had previously used to conceal it remained undisturbed. Upon removing the branches, they ventured through the narrow opening. The lantern illuminated the interior far more brightly than the candles scattered within the cave, casting a clear glow all around. Brian proposed, "Let us place the stove from the slaughter ship here tomorrow." As nightfall approached, they transported bedding from the boat, arranging it neatly on the sandy ground, with a large table set in the center. Granito enlisted the children to assist in placing the utensils upon it, while Mike and Sabuz contributed admirably as well. The two of them arranged 2 large stones at the foot of the cliff, constructing a makeshift stove, igniting the branches brought by Wepu and Wire-Kakusi. Around 6 o'clock, an enticing aroma wafted from the pot, accompanied by other delicacies, as a dozen quails skewered on iron rods roasted over the fire. Dale and Iwason turned the rods, while the hunting dogs head bobbed in tandem. By 7 o'clock in the evening, everyone gathered in the solitary room of Frankie Dan, which served as both a dining area and a bedroom. Mike began to distribute food to the youths, ensuring that none went hungry. After a long day of toil, exhaustion enveloped them. Having finished their dinner, they yearned for rest. At this juncture, Gordon suggested it would be fitting to pay homage to the grave of the original cave's master, Vudian, before retiring for the night. Darkness descended, rendering the lake's surface devoid of any light. The children approached the grave marked by a small wooden cross. The younger ones knelt while the older ones bowed their heads, offering prayers for those who had perished. Once they had moved their belongings, they proceeded to dismantle the raft, as timber would be essential for winter. Regrettably, the cave lacked sufficient space to accommodate the wood. Should the expansion of the cave prove unfeasible, they would have no choice but to store the materials in the small shed designated for their belongings. On May 13th, Bakusta, Brian, and Mike positioned the stove near the cave entrance. Erecting a chimney was no simple task. Fortunately, the rock was quite soft, allowing Bakusta to drill a hole in it, extending the pipe outside. In the afternoon, Mike ignited the fire, flames leaping up, alleviating any fears of freezing as the weather turned cold. In the following week, Donovan and the others reveled in their hunting endeavors. One day, they ventured into the forest, half a mile from the cave, where traces of human presence were evident. There were caves concealed by branches and large holes that trapped animals. These were ancient lairs, one of which still bore the remains of a creature, the identity of which had long since become unrecognizable. Perhaps it was a dinosaur that had succumbed to extinction. Wolkowski mused, descending into the cave and tossing out the bleached bones one by one. It belonged to a 4-legged creature, as evidenced by the 4-leg bones. Weep stated earnestly, "It couldn't possibly be a 5-legged animal." Sabuz retorted, "Enough with the banter." Klaus interjected, "It must have been a ferocious beast," Donovan remarked, noting the creature's large skull and jaw. Sabuz, still jesting, added, "If this fellow were still alive, you'd be terrified." "It couldn't be a lion, could it?" Klaus asked, a hint of fear creeping into his voice. "Perhaps it was a jaguar," Donovan suggested. "How terrifying!" Weep exclaimed. "I have a brilliant idea," Wolkowski announced. "Let us cover that cave with fresh branches. It might serve as a trap for catching prey." Together, Donovan and the others returned to the cave, cutting down nearby branches to obscure its entrance. A few days later, another event transpired. On that day, Brian and his companions ventured into the forest by the cliff's edge, seeking materials that could be useful for constructing a shelter. As they passed by the concealed cave, they heard noises emanating from within. Brian walked toward that direction, followed closely by Donovan, both prepared with their rifles. Van perked up his ears and sprinted ahead. He pushed aside the branches concealing the entrance to a large cave, peering within, suspecting that some creature had fallen inside. Though visibility was poor, caution was paramount. "Hey, Van." "Hey, Donovan," called the hunting dog, responding instantly. Brian and Donovan reached the cave's mouth first. "Come quickly," they beckoned their companions. "Could it be a tiger?" Whip asked. "It's truly an ostrich," exclaimed Donovan. "Thank heavens that such a bird still exists in this forest. Its flavor is utterly exquisite. Although it is an ostrich, it is smaller than the usual ones, its head resembling that of a duck, adorned with gray feathers, reminiscent of the South American creature known as the rhea." Wolkowski bravely descended to the cave floor. displaying remarkable courage and cleverness. He covered the ostrich's head with his jacket, rendering it immobile, and swiftly tied its legs with a handkerchief. Together, they exerted their strength to pull it up. Now it cannot escape. Whip shouted triumphantly. What shall we do with it? Klaus inquired. Keeping the ostrich alive would not prove easy. The children were elated at the sight of the bird, and upon hearing that Sabuz intended to ride the ostrich, they clamored for a chance to ride it as well, eager to display their bravado. Since the arrival of Frankie Dan, Gordon and the others had established a daily routine, engaging not only in work but also organizing the children to continue their education. We have brought our textbooks, Gordon remarked, to impart the lessons we have previously learned to the younger students. As winter approached, the weather grew increasingly harsh, and the youths ventured outside less frequently. The most inconvenient aspect of Frankie Dan's residence was its cramped quarters, necessitating an expansion of their living space. Chapter 12. New discoveries. The boys had ventured numerous times to the cliffs in search of other substantial caves, yet their efforts had yielded nothing. Consequently, they resolved to enlarge their dwelling. The rock was remarkably soft, making the expansion relatively straightforward. However, it consumed an indefinite amount of time, and due to the protracted winter, the project would not be completed until spring. Bacusta widened the entrance, installed the door from the sloughy, and created 2 windows on either side of the entrance, allowing light to flood the cave and refreshing the air within. A week prior, the weather had worsened significantly, with strong winds sweeping across the island. Yet the cave remained unaffected. On May 27th, the boys commenced their excavation, laboring diligently. Brian elucidated, if we dig towards the lake, we can create another entrance. When the winter winds render one side inaccessible, we can exit from the other. Within 3 days, the progress was commendable. They fashioned pointed stakes from wood to prop up the walls and prevent them from collapsing, a task quite arduous. Additionally, they had to transport the excavated soil outside. On the 30th of the month, as they dug down to 5 feet, an unusual occurrence transpired. That day, Brian, exerting himself as he had the day before, seemed to hear a faint sound emanating from within the rock as he excavated the gravel. He became alert, pricking up his ears to listen intently. Indeed, there were sounds. During the mealtime gathering, Brian spoke of this matter, instilling a sense of panic among everyone. Around 9 o'clock that night, a sudden series of roars erupted, and the hunting dogs barked incessantly, as if responding to the growls, racing towards the outside. The following morning, everyone rose early. Bacusta and Donovan ventured into the freshly dug hole to investigate, but the sounds had ceased. The hunting dogs wandered about nonchalantly, no longer barking frantically at the walls as they had the previous night. Continue digging, Brian commanded. If any suspicious sounds arise, we must cease our work immediately, Bacusta advised. Gordon suggested, it could merely be the wind rustling through the crevices of the rocks. The progress over the 2 days was remarkably smooth, devoid of the previous terrifying sounds, and the echo of their chiseling became crisp, perhaps indicating that the earlier noises originated from the natural caverns. Everyone toiled diligently, and no further incidents occurred. However, by nightfall, the dogs had vanished, leaving Gordon deeply unsettled. The others soon emerged, seeking the dogs near the cave, moving towards the light in search of them. Yet they found no trace of Van. Could it be a den of animals? Gordon pondered. It is possible, Donovan replied. We shall search for them tomorrow. As dawn broke, they meticulously scoured both the lake and river, but found nothing. Brian and Bacusta continued to alternate in their excavation. Both men labored without rest, for their tools were exceedingly worn. After a brief respite following lunch, excavation resumed at 1 o'clock. Only the final section of the wall remained to be broken through, and apprehensions arose regarding potential creatures that might emerge from the opening, prompting heightened caution. The younger children were escorted to the riverbank. Donovan, Wilkowski's, and Whip held weapons firmly in hand. At 2 in the afternoon, Brian called out sharply, and with a single strike of his pickaxe, he cracked the rock open, revealing a substantial gap. He joined his companions, but before he could utter a word, a creature suddenly bolted toward them. It turned out to be Van, the hunting dog, who first rushed to the water bucket, lapping up a significant amount before wagging his tail and bounding over to Gordon's side. Brian, carrying a lantern, squeezed into the narrow opening, followed closely by Donovan and the others. They pried apart the rock and entered the cavern, which was enveloped in darkness, rendering visibility impossible. The newly discovered second cave was comparable in size to Frankie Dan, but was notably deeper, with its floor covered in dry sand, completely isolated from the outside world. Suddenly, Wolkowski's tripped over an object. Upon inspection, he discovered it was a hardened animal carcass. Brian illuminated it with the lantern, revealing the remains of a leopard. Bacusta felt a twinge of fear. The children decided to utilize the narrow passage as a corridor, thereby intensifying their efforts. They designated the second cave as a hall, which truly warranted the title, serving as both a dormitory and a study room. The original cave was to be transformed into a kitchen and dining area. They first moved in the beds, arranged them neatly, and then set up chairs, tables, and a stove. Simultaneously, the entrance on the lakeside was expanded, and Bacusta designed a new door, flanking it with 2 windows, thereby allowing more light to illuminate the interior. The construction progressed remarkably well, yet it still consumed 2 weeks' time. During this period, the weather deteriorated, the chill set in, and the winds grew fierce, making outdoor excursions impossible. On the evening of June 10th, after dinner, the youths gathered around the hearth in the hall to deliberate on naming the significant sites on the island. "What a splendid idea!" exclaimed Brian. The boys engaged their minds, conjuring a variety of fitting names. It was unanimously decided to name the bay where the Sloggy first docked as Sloggy Bay, a name already established. "Indeed," replied Donovan. "Absolutely," echoed Klaus. To honor the memory of the ill-fated Frenchman, the name Francie Dan would no longer be used, Brian asserted. "What shall we call the river flowing through Sloggy Bay?" inquired Wilkicus. "Let us name it Shilon River, for we have a river by that name in our homeland," proposed Bacusta. "Excellent." Agreed. They all concurred. "And what about the lake?" asked Neto. "I propose we name it Family Lake," suggested Donovan. They also named the cliff Oakland Hill, and the separated promontory, where Brian had once gazed upon the sea, was dubbed False Cape. The forest, fraught with traps, was designated as the cave. The area between Sloggy Bay and the cliffs is known as marshland, while the southern part of the island is referred to as South Marsh. The river with stepping stones is called Stepping Stone River, and the coastline reached by sailing is named Storm Coast. The expansive meadow in front of the cave is designated as the playground. The cape illustrated on the Vujuan map has also acquired new names. The northern tip is called North Cape, and the southern tip is designated as South Cape. The western coast facing the Pacific Ocean has been named French Point, British Point, and American Point, respectively, honoring the boys' nationalities. "What shall we name this solitary island?" Costa suggested. "As we are students of Chimen School, let us name this island Chimen Island." The children unanimously applauded in agreement. They then elected a commander to govern the island, and that person was Gordon. Faced with such an honor, he was inclined to decline. Yet fearing it might lead to discord among the group, he ultimately acquiesced. Chapter 13. Surviving the winter. Beginning in May, winter officially settled in on Chimen Island. Expected to last at least 5 months. Under Gordon's leadership, the group prepared all necessary provisions to endure the long winter. As outdoor activities became impossible for the children, they resolved to complete their studies daily. The young boys focused on learning how to tackle life's challenges, confront various dangers, and contemplate significant questions regarding existence. They diligently studied many subjects. Each day, for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, all 15 boys, without exception, gathered in the hall for their lessons. They also brought along the calendar from the Sloggy, tearing off a page to mark the passage of each day. In order to ensure the accuracy of time, the clock must be wound properly, overseen by Wilkakis. The calendar is the responsibility of Bacusta, and Whip is fully in charge of recording the barometer and thermometer readings. Bacusta meticulously documented all occurrences on Chimen Island in a diary, and his contributions are invaluable, as he recorded everything with remarkable detail and precision. The most troublesome yet vital task here is laundry. Although soap is not an issue, Gordon repeatedly emphasized that younger students should avoid getting their clothes dirty while playing on the field or in the river. Nevertheless, Mac finds himself burdened with the washing of numerous garments each day, and he simply cannot manage alone, prompting the older students to assist him. In June, the weather has turned quite cold, with the thermometer indicating temperatures plummeting to over -10 degrees. As the winds shift from the south to the west, the temperature fluctuates accordingly, and thick snow blankets the area surrounding Frankie Dan. The children have begun to engage in snowball fights outdoors. One day, Jack stood aside, observing others play, when suddenly a snowball thrown by Klaus struck him squarely, causing Jack to burst into tears in indignation. "I didn't mean to," Klaus quickly protested, attempting to absolve himself of blame. Hearing his brother's cries, Brian rushed over, saying, "Regardless of intent, Throwing snowballs with such force is quite dangerous. What are you doing standing here if you're not playing? Klaus retorted. Just spouting pretty words, shouted Donovan. It's nothing. Mind your own business. This is between Klaus and me, Brian replied. You are quite domineering, exclaimed Donovan. You seem to enjoy being overbearing. Why do you frequently employ such a term? Brian retorted. Why are you so fierce? Donovan refused to back down. Had it not been for Gordon's timely arrival, a confrontation between Brian and Donovan would undoubtedly have ensued. By the end of June, the weather had turned too cold for snowball fights, with snow accumulating to a thickness of 3 to 4 feet. As July began, the children found themselves confined to their cave for half a month, unable to engage in outdoor activities, and their days were filled with study and orderly discussions. It was during this time that they encountered a troublesome predicament. Normally, they could draw water from the river at low tide, but now the river had frozen over, making it impossible to access water. Gordon conferred with Bacusta, affectionately referred to as the technician by the others. Bacusta, after considerable effort, managed to bury a pipe that had been used on the Sloggy, and through repeated experimentation, they successfully diverted water from the river into the cave, resolving their water supply issue. However, the problem of food continued to plague the young ones. Hunting and fishing had become unfeasible, and with no other options, Mike had no choice but to gradually consume the supplies he had salvaged from the Sloggy. On the morning of July 9th, Brian rose early to check the weather at the cave entrance. The wind had shifted to a southern breeze, still somewhat chilly, prompting him to hurry back to the cave and inform Gordon of the conditions. We are running low on firewood. That's easily remedied. Are there not plenty of supplies within the island's caves? The thermometer indicates that, even with a stove, the temperature barely reaches 5 degrees. Upon venturing outside, it plummets to a frigid -17 degrees. Around 9 o'clock, after breakfast, they proceed to the cave. The weather is splendid today, with a clear blue sky and no wind. Outside the cave lies a vast expanse of white. Walking on the snow is effortless. However, transporting a substantial amount of firewood to the cave proves to be quite a challenge. Mike devises an ingenious plan. He flips over a large table, measuring 12 feet in length and 4 feet in width, so that its surface faces downward, allowing it to glide across the snow. The older children are tasked with pulling the table's legs towards the cave using ropes. The ice and snow between Oakland Hill and Family Lake are quite thick, and the snow-laden branches glisten in the sunlight, creating a breathtaking sight. As early August arrives, the weather gradually improves. Donovan, Brian, Sabuz, Wilcox, and Bacosta plan an excursion to Sly Bay, intending to depart in the morning and return to the cave by evening. They anticipate encountering various animals along the coastline and need to replace the flag that has been tattered by the winter winds. Brian suggests that they should hoist Frankie Dan's emblem on the mast. On the morning of August 19th, before dawn, Brian, Donovan, and the other three set off. The sky is cloudless, and the moon emits a pale, silvery glow. It is approximately 6 miles to Sly Bay. The creature leaping upon the fissured ice is the sea leopard. To ensnare the sea leopard, one must first obstruct the gaping cracks in the ice. Should Brian and his companions launch an immediate assault nearby, the sea leopard would swiftly escape through the fractures. It appears that capturing the sea leopard necessitates the formation of a specialized expedition team in the future. Thus, winter has passed, due to their utmost caution. The children have endured little hardship, remaining in good health and making significant progress in their studies. At this juncture, the youths have been adrift on Chiman Island for 6 months. Chapter 14. Lakeshore Exploration. Before conducting a comprehensive survey of the entire island, it is prudent to explore the vicinity between Auckland Hill, Family Lake, and the caves. Is there an abundance of usable firewood in the area? To gain a thorough understanding of the island, the youths resolved to undertake their investigation in November. Although the calendar indicated that spring was approaching, the high latitude of Chiman Island rendered the weather still quite frigid, with fierce winds threatening to displace Auckland Hill, making even the act of closing a door a daunting task. The wind invaded the corridors, penetrating into the hall, chilling the air more than the depths of winter. During this time, rain and storms followed in quick succession. The fish and birds were nowhere to be seen, and the children were unable to play outside. To carve through the hardened snow, lacking vehicles, they had to resort to using tables, while Bacusta fashioned tools capable of carrying heavy loads. On the Slougy vessel, there exists a contraption for coiling anchor ropes, adorned with 2 wheels. Bacusta pondered the utilization of these wheels. It is no simple task, even for an expert. In truth, Any robust animal could suffice to draw the cart. However, on Shaman Island, there are no formidable beasts, only avian creatures. How could birds possibly replace them in pulling a cart? What accounts for the island's avian exclusivity? Speaking of birds, one might consider the ostrich of Sabuz, which is notoriously difficult to tame. Yet, Sabuz remained undeterred. He emulated Jack from Swiss Robinson and whimsically named the ostrich Bruntsaventen. One day he cited his cherished book, proclaiming that in Jack's eyes, the ostrich could outrun a horse. Is that so? Gordon chuckled. The Jack in the novel and you, as well as his ostrich in yours, are not the same. In what way are they different? Sabuz queried. Fantasy and reality diverge significantly. What of it? Sabuz retorted. I refuse to believe it cannot be tamed. You must understand, Gordon jested. Even if this ostrich could speak, it would not comprehend your words. Despite his friend's jests, Sabuz's determination to tame the ostrich remained unwavering. By late October, the weather began to improve, the warmth of the earth reaching the trees, heralding the arrival of spring. Children shed their winter garments, much to their relief, for they despised the heavy clothing. They engaged in the capture of birds and beasts, while Sabuz continued his attempts to tame the ostrich, though with little success. On the morning of November 26th, the obstinate Sabuz declared his unwavering intent to mount an ostrich, regardless of the consequences. The younger boys were eager to witness how Sabuz would tame the creature, though they harbored some concerns. Nonetheless, they envied Sabuz immensely. The older students, however, took the matter less seriously. Gordon, with good intentions, advised Sabuz against this reckless venture, urging him to reconsider, but Sabuz was resolute, and thus they acquiesced to his determination. Janito and Bacusta captured the ostrich and blindfolded it with a dark cloth. Despite his efforts, Sabuz struggled to climb onto the ostrich. Eventually, after considerable effort, he managed to perch himself upon its hump, his entire body trembling with apprehension. Initially motionless, the blindfolded ostrich bolted toward the forest as soon as its eyes were unveiled. Sabuz, perched atop, was rendered speechless by fear. He blindfolded the bird once more, which offered no resistance, and clung tightly to its neck. It was only upon entering a cave that he seized an opportunity to tumble off. By the time the others arrived, the ostrich had vanished without a trace. Fortunately, Sabuz landed on the grass unharmed. That wretched creature, he exclaimed angrily. You are no match for that Jack from the book. Whip remarked, it simply isn't accustomed to you. You are still strangers to one another. You will never become familiar, Gordon interjected. Sabuz, accept your fate. I have long warned you that reality diverges vastly from fantasy. With the arrival of November, preparations for an extended expedition would commence, with the objective of exploring both banks of the family lake, extending all the way to the northern shores. The weather was clear and not at all cold, alleviating any concerns about camping outdoors. The group began making preparations for their departure. This expedition saw a slight alteration in personnel. Gordon joined the mission while Brian and Neto remained behind to guard the cave. On the morning of November 5th, Gordon, Donovan, Bacusta, Wilcox, Webb, Klaus, and Sabuz bid farewell to their companions and set forth. Although Mike was not part of this adventure, the team would not encounter difficulties regarding meals, as Sabuz always claimed to possess exceptional culinary skills, expressing his desire to showcase his prowess as a chef. However, the others were well aware of his ulterior motive, seeking vengeance upon the ostriches. Gordon also brought along an inflatable kayak, which he folded neatly, rendering it quite lightweight. According to the map, there were two interconnected rivers, followed by a lake, where the kayak would prove useful. After walking 2 miles, they arrived at an area overgrown with wild grass, so dense that anyone entering would be concealed by the foliage. As they progressed, the hunting dogs discovered a hidden animal burrow. Donovan raised his firearm, intending to shoot into the hole, but Gordon stopped him. It seemed there was a fox inside, which soon emerged. Wilcox gathered a pile of dry grass and placed it at the entrance, igniting a fire. Within moments, 12 animals, all rabbits, were driven out by the smoke. Sabuz and Webb dispatched them with axes, while the hunting dogs captured 3 more. The flavor of rabbit meat is delightful, Gordon remarked, instructing them to prepare their catch. They took half an hour to traverse this small forest, which was preceded by a sandy beach, where the wind stirred up clouds of sand. The Stepping Stone River flowed steadily towards the lake. By the time the children reached the river's mouth, it was nearing noon, and they had traversed 6 miles. They decided to take a respite in the woods, arranging 2 large stones side by side to build a fire. whereupon they swiftly began roasting rabbit. Sabuz, seizing the opportunity before the enticing aroma attracted the hunting dogs, diligently turned the meat to prevent it from burning. The rabbit was soon devoured by the youths. There was ample meat to satisfy their hunger. After their meal, they commenced their crossing of the river, which was shallow and permitted a safe passage. The lake's shore gradually transformed into marshland, necessitating their movement toward the forest's edge. Within the forest, numerous birds flitted about, and Sabuz, reminded of the tale of Robinson Crusoe, felt a twinge of disappointment at not spotting a parrot emerging from the trees. He mused that perhaps the ostrich had fled. Might the talking birds exhibit more honesty? Around 5 in the evening, they arrived at a broader stretch of river. This river flowed out of the lake, meandering around the northern side of Oakland Hill before pouring into the sea. Gordon and his companions decided to pause here, having covered 12 miles that day, a testament to their efficient use of time. Although they had already named the river, their brief stop warranted it being christened Stoop River. That night passed without incident, and the following morning, they set out early. The waters of Stoop River were shallow, and the rubber dinghy finally proved its worth. This small boat could only ferry one person at a time, necessitating 7 trips and consuming an hour. It was thanks to this dinghy that they all crossed the river safely. The Hound, drenched by the water, remained utterly unconcerned as it plunged into the river, holding its breath until it reached the opposite shore. This was not a marshland. They arrived at the lakeshore before 10 o'clock. Upon landing, they sought a resting spot to pause for a while, with the lake's water just barely covering their feet, while the eastern horizon remained a seamless blend of sky and water. By noon, with a telescope in hand, Donovan exclaimed, "We can see the opposite shore." Everyone turned their gaze in that direction, and indeed, the treetops on the far side were visible. "We must reach there before nightfall," Gordon insisted. The beach was thickly overgrown with wild grass, extending northward. The northern part of Charman Island appeared to be a vast expanse of sand, contrasting sharply with the central forested area, which Gordon aptly named North Beach. "Let us walk along the right bank of the lake," suggested Donovan. "That way is not the correct route," Gordon replied, pointing to the map that indicated a distance of 30 to 40 miles, requiring 4 to 5 days of arduous travel. "We shall return another time." "In that case, let us give it a try," Gordon said, proposing to head towards Stoop River, following the lakeshore and then proceeding towards the cliffs. By 11 in the morning, they had effortlessly traversed the 9-mile stretch to Stoop River, enjoying a favorable journey. Donovan shot down 2 plump wild geese, and it was only then that his spirits lifted once more. Sabuz, spotting the game, was so elated that he nearly leaped with joy. He swiftly plucked the feathers from his catch and began to roast the meat. By 3 in the afternoon, from less than 2 miles to the northeast, the opposite shore became distinctly visible, with a seabird soaring about in the vicinity. Had the Sloughie landed here at that time, these youths would not have survived. Was there still a need to venture further? Upon reaching the right bank of the lake, there was little incentive to continue exploring. If there were any location close to the American continent, it would surely be situated to the east of the island. Following Donovan's counsel, they proceeded to the lake's edge, and as darkness descended, they had no choice but to spend the night there. The lakeside was devoid of trees, with only sparse and low vegetation. Even the moss was absent. The youths wrapped themselves in blankets and endured the night upon the sandy ground. Chapter 15. A fortunate return 200 paces from the lake's fork stood a towering sand dune, providing a panoramic view of the surroundings. As dawn broke, the youths ascended the summit of the dune and gazed northward through their binoculars. To the north lay an expansive beach that stretched endlessly toward the coastline, remarkably vast. Klaus inquired, "What shall we do next?" "There are forests again," Gordon remarked. "Bakusta, are there any game?" "I believe so," Klaus agreed. "We should trust Bakusta," Gordon asserted. "I am confident of success." With a compass to guide their direction, they continued westward. The trees to the south of the cave were sparse, making their journey remarkably effortless amidst the open space, where sunlight streamed down freely. Here, vibrant flora thrived, and the trees flourished splendidly. Gordon, ever curious about the plants, made a new discovery as he parted the branches, revealing a small tree adorned with delicate leaves and fruit the size of beans. The tree is known as the Truluca, and the indigenous people have a fondness for its fruit. "Allow me to sample it," Sabuz exclaimed, not waiting for Gordon to intervene, as he hastily grabbed several fruits and stuffed them into his mouth. Instantly, his face contorted into a grimace, prompting hearty laughter from the others, while Sabuz grimaced at the sourness that struck his palate. He awkwardly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and lamented, "Gordon, you have deceived me terribly." The small tree was surrounded by thorns, making it cumbersome to harvest. Bacusta and Whip were seen striking the branches, a method that proved remarkably effective. For soon the ground was strewn with fallen fruits. As they approached the cave, another discovery awaited them. In a clearing within the forest, sunlight poured in abundantly, nurturing the lush growth of plants. A tree stood broad, measuring between 60 to 80 feet in width, its branches adorned with numerous birds. "That river resembles the one we initially found during our exploration," Donovan remarked. "Is it the river with stepping stones?" inquired Gordon. "Indeed, it is the very river with the stepping stones," he affirmed. "Let us camp on the right bank," Gordon declared, noting that darkness was soon to envelop them. Reluctantly, they would have to spend another night outdoors, but tomorrow night promised a bed within the hall. Dinner was yet to be prepared, prompting Gordon to seek out new plants, while Bacusta decided to venture into the forest for hunting. The two companions set off together, and after walking a mere 100 paces, they spotted animals on the prairie. "Are those wild goats?" Bacusta whispered to Gordon. "Indeed, they are wild goats. We must not let them escape," Gordon replied. There were 6 wild goats grazing, completely oblivious to the impending danger. After a while, one of the goats seemed to sense something amiss and lifted its head to survey the surroundings. Bacusta, quick-witted and agile, flung a stone, striking a goat. Both Gordon and Bacusta rushed over to seize it, while 2 young goats, reluctant to stray from their mother, were also captured. "We've caught it," Bacusta exclaimed joyfully, uncertain whether it was indeed a goat. "It seems more like a Bichnia," he mused. Gordon was less certain. "Can it still produce milk?" he inquired. "Look, isn't it?" Bacusta replied. "Let's name it Bichnia." Gordon's assessment was astute. The Bichnia bore a striking resemblance to a wild goat, albeit with longer legs. Covered in short fur, a small head, and devoid of horns, predominantly inhabiting the grasslands of the Americas, particularly near the Strait of Magellan. That night, the youths dared not sleep, for the area was known to harbor wild beasts. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, a chilling roar echoed through the darkness, awakening the boys. "What has happened?" Wilkes asked. "The beasts have come," Donovan replied. "Fear not. There is nothing to be afraid of," he added, as he readied his rifle, with the others grasping their handguns. "Let us wait until they draw closer before firing," Gordon suggested. "Our campfire may deter them from approaching." "They are indeed nearby," Klaus remarked. The hunting dogs barked furiously, confirming that the beasts were in close proximity. The surroundings were shrouded in darkness, rendering visibility nearly impossible. The nocturnal creatures emerged in search of water, and upon encountering humans nearby, they became agitated and aggressive. Suddenly, at a distance of 20 paces ahead, the glimmer of an animal's eye caught their attention, shortly followed by the sound of gunfire. The shot had been fired by Donovan, and then a roar erupted as the children, armed and standing beside the fire, braced themselves. In a swift motion, Bacusta hurled a torch towards the creature, causing the beasts to flee deep into the forest, one of them undoubtedly wounded. As dawn approached, they stoked the fire vigorously, knowing that a wounded animal might succumb to its injuries, prompting the youths to venture out in search of it at first light. Not far ahead, they discovered a trail of blood, evidence of the animal's hasty escape. But what manner of creature had they encountered? A collective sigh of relief was audible. After all, no one had sustained injuries, a triumph in itself. Donovan, Whip, and Klaus, accompanied by their hunting dogs, forged ahead with remarkable speed. When suddenly they heard a call from the distance, it was Gordon's voice. At that moment, a large creature burst forth from the thicket. Bacusta swiftly threw a lasso, ensnaring its neck with precision. The group tugged at the rope, and the creature, lacking the will to resist, was soon overturned. They then loosened the rope, securing it to a tree trunk. Just then, Donovan and the others emerged from the side. "What a bothersome fellow. He has completely ruined everything," Donovan exclaimed in frustration. "I could shoot it dead," he added. "Why kill the cow?" Gordon interjected. "We've finally captured a beast that can pull a cart." "Indeed. We cannot slay it," Sabuz shouted. "This is a llama," Gordon clarified, "a common sight in South America. Although zoologists refer to it as a camel, it bears little resemblance to its African counterpart. With a long neck and a finely shaped head, its slender legs demonstrate remarkable agility. Its entire body is adorned with a light grass-colored coat, embellished with white spots, and it possesses a speed surpassing that of an ordinary horse. With proper domestication, it can be transformed into a valuable livestock." The inhabitants of South America commonly utilize it for carrying burdens. It is quite docile, allowing Bacusta to guide it with ease. Gordon unfurled the map, noting that they were still 4 miles from Francidan. Sabuz expressed a desire to ride the ostrich, hoping to impress his companions. But Gordon advised him to wait until the creature adapted to their presence, leading Sabuz to abandon the notion. Chapter 16. A joyous Christmas during Gordon's expedition. Brian managed the affairs of Francidan quite adeptly. However, he found his brother's emotional upheaval perplexing and was deeply concerned for Jack. Bacusta, ever the thinker, devised several helpful solutions for the group. The boys utilized the extensive toolbox aboard the sailboat to its fullest, discovering many useful implements within. They gathered numerous branches to construct a small shelter for the animals, fashioning a structure capable of accommodating 12 creatures, securely fastening long beams atop the posts to ensure safety even from fierce predators. The shelter was constructed using planks from the sloggy, with the timber easily sawed into boards. A thick waterproof tarp served as the roof, alleviating any worries of wind and rain. The ground was covered with straw, and an ample supply of grass ensured that the livestock were well fed at every meal. Genito and Sabuz are responsible for the daily care of the animals. The llamas and their offspring have grown accustomed to this place, appearing quite content with their surroundings. Gordon has partitioned a section of the small shed to nurture the birds, inviting the children Iwason and Jenkins to take on this delightful task, which suits them perfectly. In their daily lives, sugar is indispensable. Following Robinson's example, Sabuz suggested they venture out to search for it. Accompanied by Gordon, they journeyed to a grove of trees, discovering a species that boasts crimson leaves in early autumn. How splendid! This is the sugar maple. Gordon explained that by incising the bark of this maple, one could extract its sap, which, upon crystallization, transforms into sugar. With sugar in hand, they could concoct sweetened water, infusing it with the leaves of the tea plant. On December 7th, Donovan informed Gordon that foxes and wolves frequently harassed them. When traps failed to ensnare these creatures at night, he proposed they resort to firearms. The darkness enveloped them, rendering visibility non-existent, and not a whisper of wind disturbed the stillness. Even the footsteps of a fox skirting through the dry grass were audible. At midnight, Donovan alerted everyone that prey had approached. The young men, fully alert, awaited the arrival of the beasts with bated breath. Donovan suddenly signaled, and gunfire erupted, striking down 5 or 6 foxes in an instant, while the others hastily fled for their lives. When dawn broke, they discovered over 10 foxes had fallen to their aim. This hunting endeavor persisted for 3 consecutive nights, and by the 4th evening, these perilous visitors had ceased to appear. The recent hunt yielded considerable rewards, as the young men acquired nearly 100 splendid fox pelts, which they crafted into quilts and garments. In mid-December, the youths resolved to embark on an expedition to Sloggy Bay. The weather was splendid, and Gordon insisted on the participation of all, fulfilling the long-held dreams of the younger students, who were utterly exhilarated. They set off at dawn, knowing they would not return until after nightfall. Should they fail to make it back before dark, they would have to camp in the wilderness. The primary objective of this journey was to hunt sea leopards along the coastline. The protracted winter nights had depleted much of their lamp oil, and the candles made by Voden were dwindling as well. Lacking vegetable oil, they could only extract it from animals. Fortunately, the sea leopards possessed ample oil, making them an ideal target. 2 llamas had obediently heeded the commands of Sabuz and Nito. They were capable of pulling a cart. For this adventure, they loaded ammunition, food, tools, and other essentials onto the cart, allowing the llamas to transport their supplies. In the initial hours, the party progressed smoothly despite the somewhat rugged terrain, which caused the cart to move at a sluggish pace. The group reached Sloggy Bay around 11 o'clock, resting on the riverbank where they had previously pitched their tent when their sailboat had been damaged. The shoreline was teeming with sea leopards, seemingly at ease. These creatures appeared unacquainted with humanity, showing no signs of alarm upon encountering Gordon and his companions. They swiftly finished their lunch, and the young men began preparing for the hunt, armed with rifles and handguns. This time, Gordon could not afford to be stingy with ammunition. At this moment, Donovan was particularly energetic, showcasing his skills, and the others emulated him, swiftly dispatching around 20 sea leopards in mere minutes. Mike constructed a stove using 2 large stones, igniting a fire and placing a pot atop it. He cut 5 or 6 pounds of leopard seal meat and placed it in the pot to render fat. Before long, a significant amount of lard was produced. He inhaled deeply, noting the absence of a fishy odor, and even the obstinate Donovan found it tolerable. On the morning of December 25th, the sound of cannon fire reverberated through the skies of Auckland. Beneath the window of the hall lay 2 spare rifles, and Donovan seized one to take aim and fire. The youths exchanged well wishes among themselves, offering special blessings to the commander of Chatham Island. Costa represented the group, embracing Gordon tightly. Everyone gathered around Brian, extending their best wishes and toasting to him, which brought joy to Brian's heart, though Donovan found the scene rather tedious. Chapter 17. Exploring the eastern seas. This certainly felt like a desolate isle. When would salvation from the outside world arrive? Must they endure yet another frigid winter here? During this period, under Gordon's care, the youths had been spared the torment of illness. Nevertheless, the younger children yearned intensely for the warmth of home. The persistent question in Brian's mind was how to escape this island, yet at present, they possessed only a small boat, which seemed feeble against the vastness of the ocean. The youths lacked the means to construct a vessel capable of traversing the Pacific. What must be done now is to prepare thoroughly for the continued stay on Frankie Dan, awaiting the opportunity to leave the island, with no other alternatives at hand. They have acquired experience in enduring the biting cold of winter. As the harsh winter descends, they will be confined within the hull for weeks, perhaps months, unable to venture outside. The greatest challenges they face are the bitter cold and hunger. To combat the chill, fuel is essential. Gordon had organized the youths to gather ample firewood during autumn. The issue of sustenance is equally critical. Donovan and a few others are responsible for hunting, frequently checking the traps and snares they have set. The surplus of their catch is meticulously preserved by Mike. The spirit of exploration must not wane, even if it does not encompass the entirety of Charmin Island, at the very least. An expedition into the eastern part of Family Lake is warranted to ascertain the presence of forests, marshes, dunes, and to uncover anything of value. Brian has consulted with Gordon regarding this matter on several occasions. There is no longer any doubt about the validity of Bourdain's map. Yet an exploration of the eastern waters should also be undertaken. With our telescope, we might even glimpse land. Very well, I support your endeavor, but do exercise caution. Fear not, it shall only take 2 or 3 days. On this day, Gordon shared Brian's expedition plan with everyone. Donovan harbored some grievances regarding Brian's unilateral decision-making. But Gordon clarified that this exploration requires only 3 individuals, and since the plan was devised by Brian, it must be executed as he has outlined. Among us, he is the only one endowed with the capability and intellect for such an undertaking. You must not entertain such thoughts. Refrain from disputing every matter. Upon hearing Gordon's remarks, Donovan ceased his objections and later sought out Klaus to discreetly voice his disparaging thoughts regarding Brian. Mike expressed a keen interest in embarking on an adventure, particularly alongside Brian, while Sabuz naturally took over his responsibilities. Sabuz had always relished the opportunity to exhibit his prowess before others, and this occasion finally presented itself. Jack did not oppose accompanying his brother on this outing. With preparations complete, Mike replaced the foresail with a small triangular sail, equipped the vessel with 2 rifles, 3 handguns, ample ammunition, 3 blankets, provisions, and a set of spare oars, essentials for their expedition. On the morning of February 4th, Brian and his 3 companions bid farewell to their fellow adventurers and boarded a small boat by the banks of the Shillong River. The weather was fair, with a gentle breeze guiding them as Mike took the helm, steering them closer to the water's surface. Their pace gradually quickened, and within half an hour, Gordon and the others, who had been observing from the sports field, faded into mere specks on the horizon. In just 1 hour, the crest of Auckland Hill disappeared from view, and at noon, an ominous stillness enveloped them as the wind ceased entirely. A windless day is indeed troubling, Brian remarked, expressing his concern about the possibility of headwinds. Mike, you truly resemble a philosopher. I do not grasp the concept of a philosopher. My mood remains unchanged regardless of circumstances. Mike replied, that is precisely the essence of a philosopher. It is a challenging role. We cannot afford to halt our progress. Let us row, for if we do not reach the opposite shore before nightfall, we shall encounter significant difficulties. Indeed, Jack, take the helm, he instructed, with no wind to fill the sails. Mike took them down, and they consumed their lunch swiftly before resuming their rowing. The small boat moved as if drawn by a magnet, making only slight progress to the northeast, already positioned in the center of the lake. At 3 in the afternoon, Mike peered through the binoculars and discerned what appeared to be land ahead. By 4 o'clock, they spotted the treetops of a forest along the rather low-lying shore. A few more miles of rowing would bring them to the eastern shore. Brian and Mike, though fatigued, continued to paddle with determination. The water lay as smooth as glass, with a depth of 12 to 15 feet, while the surface was adorned with patches of grass, and fish frolicked among the aquatic vegetation. Finally, around 6 in the evening, the boat reached the shore, where pine branches drooped and cliffs lined the bank, making it impossible to land. They continued north for half a mile until they encountered the source of the lake, which was marked on the map. "This river is depicted here," Brian remarked. "Yet, it remains unnamed," Mike replied. "Indeed, it flows towards the eastern side of the island. Let us name it East River." They then discovered another river, heading towards its mouth. "Let us explore it tomorrow, Mike. It is getting late, and we should find a place to rest for the night. We can set out at dawn to better observe both shores." "Shall we land now?" Jack inquired. Brian and the others managed to disembark successfully, secure the small boat, and transfer their weapons and provisions ashore. Beneath a grand oak tree, they kindled a fire, consumed some food, and then spread blankets on the ground to wrap themselves up, quickly succumbing to slumber. In preparation for any unforeseen circumstances, they held their guns close as they slept. The sun had set, and although the night was filled with the roars of animals, no unforeseen events transpired. At 6 in the morning, Brian was the first to rise, rubbing his eyes and exclaiming, "Hey, let's get going." They swiftly boarded the small boat and paddled into the river. The waters were swift. Having begun to recede half an hour earlier, which conserved their energy, Mike only needed to steer from the stern. If the East River is merely 5 or 6 miles away, then navigating the boat during low tide is indeed fortuitous, Mike remarked. "Indeed," Brian replied. "We must not squander the advantageous high tide." "Yes, Mike, the eastern side of the island lacks land." The small boat accelerated, and the East River flowed almost in a straight line to the northeast. It was deeper and wider than the Westland River, measuring approximately 30 feet. Brian was quite anxious about the possibility of encountering whirlpools. They ventured into a dense forest, where trees akin to those in caves thrived, yet there were more oaks, pines, and firs. By 11 in the morning, the trees began to thin, and clearings became more frequent, accompanied by the briny sea breeze, suggesting proximity to the ocean. Soon, a cerulean horizon emerged across from the magnificent oaks. The small boat drifted on the perilous East River, and before long, the waters became tumultuous. Mike anchored the boat on the left bank. They observed that this area differed somewhat from the western part of the island. The rocks were loose, and there were numerous caves. Brian glanced at the harbor, noting that the bay spanned about 15 miles, with a sandy peninsula forming to the west. Beside the harbor, there was nothing but emptiness. Mike gazed through his telescope for an extended period but failed to discover any features akin to those found on the eastern and western coasts of Chiman Island. It seemed as though this place was far removed from the land. Indeed, Boudin had not delineated the landmass on the map, which was quite understandable. Brian did not feel particularly disheartened, for he had anticipated such an outcome. He restrained his disappointment and named this bay Bay of Disappointment. When does the river rise and flow upstream? The moment is now. Time is of the essence. I must ascend the high rocks for a more thorough observation. The next high tide is yet to commence, probably around 10 o'clock at night. Is it safe at night? Quite safe, as it is a full moon. The coastline is strewn with granite boulders and numerous caves, making it an ideal habitation. Within half a mile, there are about 12 or 13 caves. Brian pondered why Boudin had not settled here. The map accurately depicts this area, suggesting that Boudin must have visited. Perhaps Boudin, unable to explore the east, was compelled to take refuge at Franquedin first. At 2 o'clock, the conditions were optimal for observing the sea's surface. The three men climbed atop a towering rock, which was no simple feat. Brian directed his telescope eastward, where the horizon unfolded distinctly before him. If land lay 7 or 8 miles away, it would undoubtedly be visible through the lens. Yet here, only the vast expanse of sea and sky greeted his gaze. Brian and the three of them spent an hour in careful observation, ultimately losing all hope. Just as they were about to descend from the rocks, Mike stopped Brian and exclaimed, "Look over there," pointing towards the northeast. Brian raised his binoculars to the northeast, and indeed, just above the horizon, he spotted a cloud-like. He peered intently through the binoculars, yet that small point remained utterly still, its shape unchanged. What could it possibly be? Perhaps a mountain, though it did not conform to any known shape of one. As the sun gradually sank below the sea, the dot vanished. Was it a highland or merely sunlight reflecting off the water? Jack and Mike insisted it was merely a reflection of the sun. Yet Brian sensed it was far more complex. Mike swiftly circled the rocks, ready to dash towards the coast, when he suddenly halted. He noticed Jack leaning against Brian's knee, seemingly pleading for forgiveness. At that moment, Mike realized it was too late to discreetly retreat. He heard Jack confessing to his wrongdoing. Brian exclaimed in a loud voice, "It was all because of you. Because of you, everyone. I know I made a mistake. You never truly engaged with the group, and now I understand why. Fortunately, no one else knows yet. Please, please don't tell anyone." Mike had no intention of prying into others' private matters. Yet pretending to be oblivious was no longer an option. Thus, when only Brian remained, Mike said, "Master Brian, I overheard your conversation, but rest assured, I shall never breathe a word of it. Thank you." Brian delivered a punch to Mike while whispering. For 2 hours prior to boarding the small boat, Brian had said nothing to Jack, who had become increasingly despondent since admitting his faults to his brother, sitting alone in silence upon a rock. By 10 o'clock, the tide had risen, and the three of them boarded the small boat, untied the anchor rope, and drifted downstream. As the sun set, it quickly transformed into a full moon, illuminating the waters of the East River. The small boat continued to glide forward smoothly until midnight. Chapter 18. The election. Brian maintained silence regarding his brother's transgressions, even to Gordon. He recounted the findings to the youths gathered in the hall, elaborating on the pale point he had observed on the horizon. With no other recourse, they could only muster their spirits and await rescue from the outside. The group resumed their activities, particularly Brian, who immersed himself in his tasks with great fervor. Compared to before, his words had notably diminished, mirroring the sorrow felt by his brother. The peculiar shift in his demeanor caught Gordon's attention. He noticed that whenever courage was required or danger loomed, Brian consistently urged his brother Jack to take action. Jack was equally proactive, and Gordon sensed a peculiar understanding forming between the two brothers. In February, with all necessary tasks completed, Wilcox discovered that the salmon had begun to migrate toward the family lake, providing them with new work. They cast nets for fishing and then salted the catch for preservation, though this process proved to be quite wasteful of salt. Bacusta and Brian made several journeys to the Sloggy Bay to establish salt pans, where the seawater was evaporated by the sun to yield salt. In early March, Gordon and his companions ventured into certain regions of the southern marsh, including Donovan and Bacusta. They crafted stilts from lightweight timber, enabling them to traverse the waterlogged marshlands safely. On the morning of April 17th, Donovan, Whip, and Wilcox crossed the river in a small boat, landing on the left bank, before transferring to their stilts. Their hunting dog accompanied them, frolicking playfully in the puddles. A short walk westward brought them to solid ground, where they dismounted from their stilts to commence their search for game. The southern marsh, expansive on 3 sides aside from its eastern edge that met the sea, was teeming with wild birds. Donovan and his companions managed to capture over 100 birds without firing a single shot, though they opted to take only 20 or 30. With winter not yet upon them, Gordon planned to install heating facilities for the livestock and the nests of the small birds, which required an ample supply of dry firewood. They spent nearly half a month in the forest, transporting supplies daily with the aid of a camel. Now, even with winter potentially lasting over 6 months, there was no concern for the heating and lighting needs of Frankie Dan. Despite their ceaseless toil, the boys' study schedule remained unaffected. Their discussions occurred bi-weekly, and Donovan was always eager, imparting knowledge that was unfamiliar to the others, though they found it difficult to relate to him. In 2 months, Gordon's term will come to an end, and Donovan ardently aspires to become the next commander. Wilcox, Klaus, and Whip have all flattered him, asserting that it is a foregone conclusion. However, the younger students are reluctant to support Donovan's candidacy and are disinclined to cast their votes for Gordon again. Gordon's leadership has been perceived as excessively stern, while Donovan, who is not particularly well-liked, seeks to seize this opportunity to ascend to command. Jenkins and Doyle, having received Brian's defense during Gordon's criticisms, hold him in high regard. They believe that if Brian were to become the new commander of Charmin Island, their lives would be considerably happier. Elections are of paramount importance, casting a shadow of social dynamics over the lives of these youths. And this particular election holds significant implications for their development. Brian remains indifferent to the election. He and his brother work with great enthusiasm, often rising early and returning late. Besides their studies, The boys enjoy several hours of leisure each day, with physical exercise being essential for maintaining health. They tie ropes to tree trunks and climb to the branches to practice tree climbing, engage in pole vaulting, swimming, and honing their skills in stone throwing and lassoing, with those excelling in these activities receiving commendations. On the afternoon of April 25th, 8 boys, Donovan, Whip, Wilcox, and Klaus formed one team, while Brian, Bacusta, Nito, and Sabuz constituted the other, played a ring toss game on the low grassy field of the sports ground. 2 iron rods stood 2 meters apart, with participants positioned at the midpoint outside the line, each holding 2 rings to toss onto the rods. Successfully encircling one rod earned 2 points, while encircling both yielded 4 points. If a ring landed near the rod, it was worth 1 point. The competition between the 2 groups was fiercely contested, as one team featured Donovan and the other Brian. Brian's team scored 7 points, slightly ahead of Donovan's 6. During the finals, both teams started with 5 points, with each group given 2 additional chances to toss their rings. Now it was Donovan's turn. Aim well, this is your last opportunity, urged Weipu. Donovan bit his lip, furrowing his brow as he began to throw the rings. Unfortunately, his aim faltered, landing only beside the rod, totaling 6 points. Next was Brian's turn. Go for it. You can do it, shouted Sabuz. Brian was not merely focused on personal glory, he aimed to secure victory for his team. He made his toss, 7 points. Sabuz erupted in cheers. We won. We won. Instantly, Donovan rushed forward, exclaiming, "This is unfair. This is unjust." Brian cheated, his foot crossed the line. "You are slandering me," retorted Brian. "If my foot crossed the line, it would be a mistake, but to accuse me of cheating is something I refuse to accept." Brian stepped towards the line, declaring, "Look closely, there is still sand on the sole of my shoe. Donovan, you are intent on defaming me." Donovan shed his shirt, rolling up his sleeves, appearing ready to engage in a physical confrontation. "Is it not enough that you accuse me? Now you seek to instigate a fight?" Brian, infuriated, rolled up his sleeves and advanced towards Donovan, signaling that a brawl was indeed imminent. As Donovan and Brian were on the verge of a confrontation, Gordon arrived, having come to deliver a message. The swallows took flight towards the northeast, carrying with them the boundless hopes of the young men, who watched as the birds soared further and further away. On May 25th, an unexpected snowfall blanketed the ground, arriving earlier than last year. It seemed this winter would be even harsher. Fortunately, concerns over fuel, candles, and food were alleviated. For several weeks, the youth had been restless. Knowing that Commander Gordon's term would conclude on June 10th, whispers circulated among them, speculating that Gordon had no desire to continue in his role, while Brian, a Frenchman in a predominantly British assembly, had no inclination to take command. Donovan feigned indifference towards the election, though inwardly, he was deeply invested. Intelligent and courageous, he had a chance of being elected despite his arrogance. His close companions, Wilcox, Whip, and Klaus, tirelessly campaigned for Donovan's candidacy. On June 10th, voting commenced in the afternoon. Mike, being of African descent, lacked voting rights, leaving only 14 individuals eligible to cast their ballots, with 8 votes required for a majority. Gordon presided over the vote counting, which began at 2 p.m. He announced the results. Brian received 8 votes, Donovan 3, and Gordon 1. Both Donovan and Gordon declared their abstentions, while Brian cast his solitary vote for Gordon. Donovan was incensed by the outcome, and Brian was taken aback by his own majority. Initially contemplating relinquishing the honor, his thoughts shifted upon seeing his brother Jack, prompting him to say, "I express my gratitude for your support, and I shall endeavor to contribute more for the benefit of us all in the future." Chapter 19. Perilous outing. Gordon was apprehensive that Donovan would harbor even greater resentment towards Brian following his election. Nevertheless, he felt genuine joy at Brian's selection as commander. From that day forth, Donovan and his companions plotted to teach Brian a lesson. Jack was taken aback by his brother's acceptance of the election results. "Brother, how could you?" he began. Brian softly replied, "Indeed, I intend to work harder to atone for my past mistakes." "Thank you, brother. Please allow me to take on more responsibilities." The flag that once fluttered atop Oakland Hill had long since been tattered by the winds. Brian conferred with Bacusta about weaving a large grass wreath from the resilient reeds growing alongside the marsh, intending to replace the British flag during their final outing on June 17th. The weather outside continued to deteriorate. They dragged their small boat ashore, covered it with waterproof cloth, and set up numerous ropes and traps in preparation for the winter. At the beginning of August, the first few days were exceedingly cold, with temperatures plummeting to a chilling -30 degrees. Brian was deeply concerned about the current weather. The stillness was eerie, and merely stepping outside the cave for a brief moment left one feeling bone-chillingly cold. Fortunately, the harshness did not persist. On the afternoon of August 6th, a westerly wind began to blow, yet it had little impact on Frankie Dan, for the cave was remarkably sturdy and would withstand even an earthquake. The fierce winds toppled numerous trees, saving the young ones considerable effort. Brian contemplated organizing an outdoor ice skating event, and Bacusta crafted several pairs of wooden-soled shoes equipped with iron blades, transforming them into skates. Children in New Zealand have a profound fondness for ice skating, and at this very moment, they are able to engage in large-scale skating on the family lake. A splendid skating venue lies 3 miles offshore, where they observed that the ice extended far to the east while traversing the caves. Donnie Fan and Klaus brought their rifles along, while Brian and Gordon, though not particularly enamored with skating, felt a sense of responsibility and diligently searched for a suitable spot. As soon as the words were spoken, everyone rushed onto the lake, gliding gracefully upon the ice. Among these youths, Jack's skating prowess was unparalleled, and Brian felt a swell of joy seeing his brother finally joining in the fun. Hearing the praises for Jack's remarkable skating, Donnie Fan, who was quite confident in his own abilities, felt a pang of jealousy and intentionally wandered off into the distance, with Klaus close behind. At that moment, the horn had sounded. "Hey, Klaus," he called out. "Look, there are wild ducks to the east. Let us go and catch a few." However, Brian had strictly instructed against it. "Don't listen to him. Let us go after the ducks." The two of them pursued the wild ducks, quickly straying half a mile away. The horn sounded again. Gordon said. Brian rallied the boys once more. "We must find them before the fog envelopes us." "Brother, let me go," Jack said. "We can locate them." "All right," Brian replied. "Off you go, Jack. Take the gun and the horn to signal us." "And the cannon," Brian added. The vessel, Sloggy, was equipped with 2 small cannons, which were promptly brought forth. Boom. Thor and Costa covered their ears, startled by the deafening cannon fire. Donovan and his companions would surely hear it. Moments later, the distant crack of rifles echoed through the air. It was Donovan and his team. Saboos let out a jubilant cheer. Brian was filled with anxiety for his brother Jack. While Klaus and Donovan headed south, Jack ventured eastward. If Donovan and Klaus were unable to hear the cannon fire, they too would become disoriented. The temperature over the lake at night could plummet to -15 degrees. If Jack were to spend the night on the icy surface, he would undoubtedly succumb to the cold. "I should not have allowed him to go," Brian exclaimed in distress. Starting a fire along the lakeshore was a prudent idea. As Will, Kaukos, and the others began to gather dry branches, Gordon interjected, "Hold on." Peering through his binoculars, he spotted a figure in the northeast. "I believe I see a silhouette." Brian hurriedly took the binoculars, gazed for a moment, and exclaimed, "Wonderful! It's Jack. I can see him." The group erupted into shouts. Calling out Jack's name, Jack glided toward them, but there was something trailing behind him. "It appears he has company," Bacusta shouted, and indeed, a pair of shadows loomed 100 paces behind Jack. To their astonishment, it was a bear. This island harbored bears. Was this a novel discovery? Or had the creature traversed the frozen sea from an iceberg? If that were the case, there might be land nearby. As the dense fog began to dissipate, the weather improved, and suddenly, 2 bears emerged from unknown origins, startling him. He composed himself and hurriedly skated away. The bears did not give chase, for if he were to stumble, he would surely become their prey. Upon returning to the hall, Brian addressed Donovan, saying, "Did I not forewarn you to prioritize safety? Yet you chose to disregard my counsel, leading to this predicament. Nevertheless, Donovan, you saved Jack, and for that, I must extend my gratitude." Chapter 20. Separation from the group beneath a coastal pine tree. A fire blazed as 4 youths sat nearby, roasting ducks. After finishing their meal, they wrapped themselves in blankets, leaving one person to keep watch while the other 3 slumbered until dawn. These 4 youths were none other than Donovan, Klaus, Whip, and Wilkowskis. They formed a tight-knit group, no longer wishing to associate with Brian and the others. As the second winter neared its end, the relationship between Donovan and Brian further deteriorated. Donovan completely disregarded Brian's authority, and the tranquility of Frankie Dan was disrupted, making it increasingly difficult for him to coexist with the others. Donovan and his 3 supporters, Klaus, Whip, and Wilkowskis, largely isolated themselves from the group, often congregating in a corner of the hall during inclement weather, engaged in unspoken conversations. As October arrived, the ice on the lakes and rivers had completely melted. On the night of October 9th, Donovan expressed his desire to leave Frankie Dan. "Are you seeking to divide us?" Gordon inquired. "Divide us? What nonsense. We merely wish to reside elsewhere." "What exactly do you intend, Donovan?" "Live your own life. In a word, I refuse to heed Brian's commands." "What have I done wrong?" Brian inquired. "You have performed splendidly. What errors could you possibly commit? The previous commander was American, and now we have a Frenchman. Perhaps next it will be Mike?" "Do not push it too far," Gordon retorted. "How am I overstepping? You all serve as commanders. Perhaps that is not so terrible, but it certainly vexes a few of us." "Very well," Brian declared. "Go wherever your whims take you." "Indeed, we shall depart tomorrow." Donovan had long wished to part ways with Brian and his crew. Several weeks prior, Brian had mentioned that there were numerous habitable caves in the eastern part of the island, and Donovan planned to settle there. First, they would traverse the 6-mile lake, followed by a 6-mile journey along the East River. At the break of dawn the next day, Donovan and his 3 companions set forth, crossing the Chelan River by boat, heading south into the marshes. To better familiarize themselves with the surroundings, they chose to walk rather than boat across the lake. The weather was splendid, allowing them to cover 5 to 6 miles a day. By 5 in the evening, they reached the southern end of the lake and decided to spend the night there. The following day, the 4 prepared to set off again. Donovan consulted the map. Traveling 7 miles from this point would lead them out of the East River, likely reaching their destination by evening. Would it not be wiser to take a shortcut? Wilcox suggested. "No, the marshlands are unfamiliar to us. We cannot tread on uncertain paths." At 11 o'clock, Donovan and his companions enjoyed their lunch at the lake's fork, gazing towards the east. An expanse of verdant forest unfurled before them as they ventured into its depths. At 6 o'clock, they found refuge along the banks formed by the lakes. Arriving at the East River where remnants of a long-extinguished campfire marked the spot where Brian and his companions had spent their first night during their previous exploration of Disappointment Bay. 8 months prior, they had traversed this very path, and Donovan had never anticipated that he would return here today. The trio, Wilcox and others, who had come from the comfort of the well-appointed Francie Dan, now felt a twinge of regret. However, their fates were now intertwined, prompting Donovan to temper his arrogance, as he was unaccustomed to heeding Brian's commands. The following day, Donovan insisted on crossing the East River immediately, despite knowing it would take them an additional day. They dragged the rubber boat into the water, its breadth imposing as they rowed towards the opposite shore. Their journey proved arduous, the forest dense, the ground littered with underbrush and mud, rendering their progress exceedingly difficult. At midday, they paused for a brief respite, enjoying their meal before advancing a mere 2 miles, at which point they would need to wield axes to carve a path forward. This proved time-consuming, and by the time they emerged from the forest, it was already 7 in the evening, with nightfall cloaking their surroundings and uncertainty about the coastal conditions. They opted to camp there for the night, their thoughts filled with anticipation of finding shelter in a cave the following day. As the night wore on, it was Donovan's turn to keep watch while the other 3, utterly exhausted, succumbed to slumber. Donovan, too, felt fatigue, and when the time came for the shift change, all remained in deep repose, undisturbed. In the forest, a profound silence enveloped the surroundings, devoid of any imminent peril. Thus, Donovan added more branches to the fire and reclined beneath a tree, quickly succumbing to slumber. Upon awakening the following day, he beheld the horizon where the sea met the sky, as the sun ascended above the horizon. Chapter 21. A chance encounter with humanity. Donovan and his companions, after much wandering, finally beheld the vast expanse of the ocean for the first time. Ifchaman Island lies not too far from the American continent. Then the vessels traversing the Strait of Magellan towards Chile and Peru must certainly approach from the east. They made their encampment at Disappointment Bay. Though the quality of Brian's character left much to be desired, the name he chose was indeed unfortunate, a clear misjudgment on his part, yet I comprehended his intent. Donovan waxed eloquent, primarily to justify his departure from Frankie Dan. He raised his telescope and gazed towards the horizon, this time intending to explore the mouth of the East River. Brian aptly noted that this was a natural harbor capable of withstanding the fiercest storms. Behind the harbor lay a forest, and within sight, the family lake stretched northward. Among the granite along the coastline, numerous caves were revealed, and they chose one that was relatively close to the banks of the East River. This cave was spacious, and Donovan and his companions deemed it to be no less remarkable than Frankie Dan. Subsequently, they conducted an exploration of the coastline, capturing birds and fishing, and discovered an abundance of shellfish. While surveying the mouth of the East River, Brian ascended a large circular rock, which piqued Donovan's curiosity due to its unusual shape. He named the harbor visible from this rock Bear Rock Bay. In the afternoon, Donovan and Wilkowski ascended Bear Rock to gaze over the harbor. They were unable to spot land or ships, nor could they see the white that had caught Brian's attention. Perhaps it was a trick of the sunlight. Or maybe Brian had merely misjudged. Shall we retrace our steps, crossing the lake first, and then heading to the East River? That would be quite agreeable, wouldn't it? Suggested Whip. Borrow? Who? Inquired Donovan. Who else but Brian? Brian? He wouldn't lend? Donovan retorted angrily. That little boat doesn't belong to him. If he dares to refuse. At the break of dawn on October 14th, the quartet set forth towards the northern coast. After traversing 3 miles, they discovered numerous rocks between the forest and the sea, with a sandy beach barely 100 paces wide. Upon reaching a place devoid of rocks, they paused for a brief respite and had a light meal. They came across a river flowing into the ocean, its origin not from the lake, but seemingly from the northern side of the island. Although it was modest in size, Donovan named it North Stream. Their inflatable boat ferried them across North Stream, and they pressed onward. This region was adorned with abundant beech trees, which Donovan aptly dubbed the Beech Grove. Before sunset, they had walked 9 miles. Still 9 miles away from the northern side of the island. Despite the thunder and lightning, Donovan and his companions were undeterred, finally reaching their destination. They felt invigorated. All around them were beech trees, providing excellent shelter beneath their boughs. At 8 o'clock, they heard the crashing waves against the shore, the sea roiling tumultuously. As the dense fog dissipated, the sky grew increasingly dim. Before darkness enveloped the horizon, they sought to glimpse the expanse of the Pacific. Though utterly fatigued, they pressed onward, pondering whether they were traversing an endless ocean or a narrow strait. Suddenly, the swift-moving Wilkowskis came to an abrupt halt, spotting a shadow on the beach and colliding with an object. Could it be that a colossal creature, akin to a whale, had been cast ashore? At the water's edge lay an overturned vessel, beside which 2 bodies reclined. Initially, Donovan and his companions stood in astonishment, but without a moment's hesitation. They dashed towards the lifeless forms. Were they truly corpses? A wave of dread washed over them. Perhaps these individuals were still alive. Without taking the time to ascertain, they fled into the forest. Night descended, and within the darkness, the howling winds melded with the crashing waves against the shore. What a tempest it was! Branches swayed perilously in the storm, rendering the ground beneath the trees a treacherous refuge. Yet, at that moment, there were no alternatives. The wind whipped up the sand, making it impossible to camp outdoors. The 4 companions dared not stir throughout the night, unable to sleep despite the biting cold. They could not kindle a fire, fearing that the accumulation of dry leaves might ignite a catastrophe. From whence had that small boat come? Which nation did the unfortunate souls belong to? Was there land nearby? Amidst the storm, Donovan and Wilkowski's exchanged thoughts on the day's unsettling discoveries. They are now exceedingly weary, having not encountered another soul since the tragic demise of the Slaffy. The sight of human remains, washed ashore like corpses by the relentless waves, is a harrowing first for them, evoking a primal fear born of their youthful ignorance. After a while, as tranquility envelopes their spirits, an urgent awareness arises within them, a compulsion to act. By the morrow, they resolve to journey to the coast, to dig a grave, and to offer prayers for the 2 unfortunate souls, laying them to rest. The vessel lies capsized beside a low dune, and to their astonishment, the 2 victims from the previous night have vanished. Could they still be alive? Wilkowski exclaimed. Uncertain, Klaus responded. They may have been swept away by the tide, Donovan suggested. He ascended the rocky shore and peered through his telescope, yet found nothing. Perhaps they had been washed out to sea. The ship, a steamboat converted into a yacht, featured a deck at the bow, measuring approximately 30 feet in length, with a gaping hole in the port side, the mast broken, and tattered sails fluttering in the wind. Nothing of value remained aboard. They examined the stern, where the name of the vessel and its port of registry were inscribed. St. Francis, Saipan. St. Francis is a port in California, America, and thus this is indeed an American ship. Yet, the victims of the Saipan remain elusive. Chapter 22. Transforming peril into safety after Donovan and his companions departed, the other youths under Frankie Dan's care spent their days in worry for them. Although the incident bore no fault of Brian's, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. His heart weighed down more heavily than any of the others. The grassy ring atop Auckland Hill, standing at a mere 200 feet, could only be appreciated up close. Brian pondered various methods to create a marker at a greater elevation. One day, he engaged in a conversation with Bacusta regarding kites. "We are not lacking in materials or tools. If we construct a sufficiently large kite, it could potentially soar to around 1,000 feet, he suggested. "It's worth a try," Bacusta replied. During the day, this kite could be visible from as far as 60 miles away, and by night, they planned to hang oil lamps from it. Everyone deemed this plan feasible. The endeavor of kite-making stirred considerable excitement among the children. While the younger students perceived it merely as a game, the initiative was undeniably serious. Bacusta and Brian immediately commenced the construction of the kite. Bacusta designed an octagonal kite frame using sturdy reeds found by the lakeside, while Brian stretched lightweight fabric and secured it to the frame with elastic bands. This fabric, being windproof, was perfectly suited for kite making. Given its substantial size, lifting the kite by hand was impossible. However, aided by the wind, it could elevate a person. Utilizing the original winch from a sailing vessel, they wound the kite string. And Dahl and the others aptly named this creation the Sky Giant. On the evening of the 15th, Brian and his team completed the kite, and he resolved to launch it the following afternoon, when everyone would gather to witness the event. However, the anticipated test flight on October 16th was thwarted, coinciding with the day that Donovan and his crew encountered a storm. On October 27th, the wind continued to blow fiercely, and in the afternoon, the direction shifted. Brian hoped that the weather on October 18th would improve. October 18th holds significant historical importance for Cham Island. Although many regard Friday as an ill-fated day, Brian was reluctant to let superstition delay their plans by 14 hours. The wind that day was mild, presenting a splendid opportunity for kite flying, and they completed the final preparations by midday. After lunch, the boys gathered at the sports field. At 1:30 p.m., the kite lay on the ground, trailing a long tail, poised for flight. Suddenly, Brian halted. He noticed the hunting dog sprinting towards the forest, barking as if it had discovered something. As Brian and his companions ventured 50 to 60 meters forward, they spotted the dog halted before a tree, lying on the ground as though it were a person. It was a woman. She lay motionless, her attire intact, yet her face bore an expression of anguish despite her seemingly robust physique. A middle-aged woman. She appeared to have fainted from exhaustion and hunger. Brian checked for her breath and found that she was still alive. He pried open her mouth and poured in a bit of brandy. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Upon seeing a group of boys surrounding her, she was taken aback. Then, she accepted the biscuits offered by Jack and devoured them voraciously, clearly famished. The woman stirred once more and spoke in English, expressing her gratitude. "Thank you." 30 minutes later, Brian and Bacusta carried the woman back to the cavern's hall, with Gordon assisting, striving to protect her. The woman, having regained a modicum of strength, recounted her story. She was an American named Catherine Letty, affectionately known as Kate. For over 20 years, she had served as a maid for the family of Albin William Penfold in New York. A month prior, the Penfolds had embarked on a journey to Chile to seek out relatives, arriving in San Francisco before boarding the merchant vessel Sabine, captained by Sean Turner. Destined for Valparaiso, the Penfolds had requested Kate to accompany them on this voyage. Among the 8 newly hired crew members, several were criminals. On the 10th day of their departure, a man named Walston, along with his accomplices, Brandon, Rook, Henry, Baku, Obus, Kopp, and Paiku, conspired in secret, resulting in the tragic demise of the captain and the Penfolds. They seized control of the ship, intending to sail to South Africa for the purpose of slave trading. The only 2 individuals who aided Kate in surviving were Obus, who was less ruthless than his compatriots, and a man named Ivan Sun, who navigated the vessel. Had he lacked this skill, Walston's gang would not have spared him. This harrowing incident transpired on the evening of October 7th, approximately 300 miles off the Chilean coast, when Walston commanded Ivan to steer towards the western coast of Africa. Several days later, for reasons unknown, the ship caught fire. Walston and his crew failed to extinguish the flames, and in a desperate attempt to douse the fire on his body, one of them plunged into the sea and drowned. The remaining members hastily transferred a multitude of provisions and weapons to a small boat, abandoning the larger vessel. Adrift at sea, the small boat was soon besieged by a fierce storm, and on the night of the 15th, it was cast ashore at Chiman Island. 5 individuals were swept away by the raging waves, while 2 were hurled onto the beach. Among them lay Kate, who had fainted behind the small boat. Upon regaining consciousness, she remained cautious and resolved to seek rescue at dawn. At 3 in the morning, the sound of footsteps echoed around her. It turned out to be Woolston, Brandon, and Lark, who had miraculously survived the ocean's grasp. They roused the unconscious Obus and Paiku, while Ivan's son was kept under guard by Corp and Lark as they deliberated their next course of action. Where has Kate gone? Lark inquired. She is a nuisance, he remarked. If she survives, it will spell trouble. Kate overheard their conversation and resolved to escape. The crew of the Saipan must flee for their lives. Soon, Woolston and his companions, carrying Obus and Paiku along with their small boat and belongings, hastily departed. As they distanced themselves, Kate rose to her feet. The tide had risen, and the sea was tumultuous. Without hesitation, she fled in the opposite direction of Woolston. This explains why Donovan and the others, upon their second visit to the shore, found no trace of anyone. Kate stumbled her way towards her family's home in Hubei. On the afternoon of the 16th, she foraged for wild fruits to stave off hunger. That evening, and into the following morning, she continued her relentless journey, only to collapse beneath a tree from exhaustion and starvation. Thus did Kate recount her tale. Since the boys' arrival on the island, they had thrived, but now 7 nefarious individuals had set foot on their territory. Should they discover Frankie Dan, an attack would surely ensue, leading to the theft of food, weapons, and especially the tools necessary for repairing their small boat. The peril faced by these boys, who were no older than 15 and as young as 10, was indeed grave. Upon hearing Kate's words, Brian immediately thought of the precarious situation of Donovan and his companions. A single gunshot could alert Woolston and his crew to their presence. With the villains now on the island, unity was imperative. Indeed, I shall seek them out, Brian declared. You? Alone, Brian? I will row across the lake with Mike, and then descend to the East River. I trust we shall spot Donovan and the others at the river's mouth. Shall we act now? We cannot wait until dawn to cross the lake. We risk being discovered. I will join you, brother, Jack insisted. Returning to the hall to await the fall of night, Kate listened intently as the boys recounted their daring escapades on Charmant Island. Their bravery filled her with joy, and she resolved to remain on the island to care for these unfortunate children who had been away from home for 2 years. With all preparations complete, they set off at 8 o'clock. Mike, ever unafraid of danger, was more than willing to accompany Brian on this venture. 2 individuals, well prepared with provisions and armed for potential peril, embarked upon a small vessel, bidding farewell to their companions before swiftly disappearing into the shadows of Family Lake. At 10:30 p.m., Brian nudged Mike's arm, directing his gaze towards the faint, flickering glow of a dying campfire, obscured across the East River's right bank. Several hundred meters away, was it the Walshtun group, or perhaps Donovan and his companions? The answer remained uncertain. Let us investigate, Brian suggested. May I accompany you? Mike inquired in a hushed tone. Remain here to avoid detection, Brian instructed. As their small craft grounded upon the shore, Brian cautioned Mike against hasty actions. Armed with a dagger and a pistol secured at his waist, and essential for any encounter with nefarious individuals, Brian bravely ventured alone into the forest. Suddenly, he halted. By the dim light of the dwindling embers, he discerned movement in the underbrush. A chilling roar echoed through the night, and shortly thereafter, a leopard sprang forth. At that moment, Brian heard a desperate cry for help. Help! Help! It was Donovan. The unfortunate man lay on the ground, writhing in agony as the leopard bore down upon him, rendering him unable to wield his weapon. In this critical instant, Wilkowski's rushed over, aiming his firearm at the leopard, preparing to pull the trigger. Do not shoot! Do not shoot! Brian shouted, and at his exclamation, the leopard redirected its attention toward him. Donovan scrambled to his feet in a panic. With swift resolve, Brian unsheathed his dagger, bracing himself against the oncoming beast. The leopard deftly dodged his strike and, after inflicting a savage gash upon Brian's shoulder, retreated into the darkness. Brian, thank you. I owe my life to you. Do not mention it. It was nothing, he replied modestly. Brian had merely sustained a superficial injury from a leopard, yet it was prudent to tend to it. As Wilkowski bandaged Brian's wound, he recounted the circumstances that had led to their predicament. Donovan pondered the fate of a few others who had been washed ashore, they were certainly not dead. If they were nefarious individuals, they would undoubtedly incite chaos on the island. Earlier, fearing that a gunshot would attract the attention of Wollston's gang, Brian had called out to refrain from shooting. "Hey, Brian, you are truly remarkable. From this moment forth, I shall heed your command," Donovan expressed gratefully. Brian asserted, "We must depart immediately. If they discover us, it could spell trouble." At dawn, they boarded the boat, 6 individuals over the limit, proceeding with utmost caution. Thanks to the favorable winds and Mike's adept handling of the vessel, they safely traversed the lake. By 4 a.m., when they reached the embankment of the Zealand River, a sense of elation enveloped them. Chapter 23. Aerial reconnaissance. The predicament faced by Frankie Dan's youths was perilous. It was evident that Wollston's gang was eager to vacate Chimney Island, should they become aware of the presence of 15 youths in their midst. Possessing a wealth of coveted items, they would not let such an opportunity slip by. Thus, vigilance was of the essence. Gordon and Brian inquired of Kate. However, Kate remained uninformed. Following the fire on the Sabine, the helmsman Ivanson had made every effort to steer the small boat closer to the American mainland, indicating that Chimney Island was not too distant from the continent. 10 days swiftly elapsed, yet the group led by Wollston did not make their appearance around the Ceylon River. Had they repaired their small boat and departed? According to Kate, they possessed axes and small knives used by the crew, which should suffice for the repairs. Although the situation remained somewhat unclear, it was evident that they had not ventured far. Bacusta and Donovan arrived at Oak Hill and toppled the mast bearing the insignia of Frankie Dan. During this time, Kate provided meticulous care for the young ones. In the forest beside the marsh, towering trees, some 50 to 60 feet high, thrived luxuriantly, untouched by human hands and unsuitable for firewood. On October 25th, upon spotting such trees, Kate exclaimed, "God bless, these are the cow trees." Dal and Costa chuckled in response. "What do you mean by cow trees? Trees specifically for cows?" This is a momentous discovery. When the bark of these trees is cut, a milky substance flows forth, possessing nutritional value akin to that of cow's milk. When coagulated, it can be transformed into exquisite cheese and even candles. Joy permeated the group as Gordon sliced into the bark, and indeed, a creamy liquid began to flow, which Kate eagerly collected in a jar. Thus, on Chimney Island, the essentials of life became increasingly abundant, and everyone expressed their gratitude towards Kate. By early November, Frankie Dan remained safe and sound, and Brian concluded that Wollston's party was still on the island. One evening, Kate said, "Mr. Brian, I wish to venture out tomorrow. I am currently uncertain whether the Wollston gang remains on the island. I intend to venture to the coast to ascertain their presence. Should the small boat still be there, it would indicate their continued presence on the island. If it is absent, they have surely departed. However, if those nefarious individuals were to discover me, it would spell trouble." Brian remarked, "I managed to escape last time. I am well acquainted with Frankie Dan's route, which would facilitate my escape. If I could extricate Ivanson, it would perhaps be of greater benefit to you all. If the Wollston gang still occupies the island, they would undoubtedly light a fire at night, and from a higher vantage point, it could be observed." Brian's mind was abuzz with thoughts, yet the island's highest cliff scarcely reaches 200 feet. Donnie and his companions had ascended Oakland Hill multiple times to survey the surroundings, but could not glimpse the opposite shore of Family Lake. They could only behold the rocks of Disappointment Bay. If only they could reach a greater height. A notion flickered in Brian's mind. Initially, he deemed it somewhat ludicrous, yet he could not dismiss it. He contemplated the use of a kite. Kate's arrival had made them acutely aware of the unfavorable circumstances he faced, causing the kite-flying scheme to be temporarily shelved. However, should he manage to utilize the kite for aerial reconnaissance, it could be realized. Brian felt this idea held considerable feasibility. He recalled having read in a newspaper about a woman in the late 18th century who experimented with flying a kite aloft. What she had accomplished, Brian believed he could achieve as well, posing no inherent danger. If successful, it would indeed be splendid. With meticulous planning, success was attainable. On the evening of November 4th, Brian convened Gordon and others to unveil his audacious plan. Using a kite, Bacchus expressed his astonishment. During the day, Bacchus was equally taken aback. "No, during the day we might be discovered by Wollston and his ilk. That would render our efforts futile. It must be done at night, however. Illuminating the kite poses safety concerns," Doniphan remarked. Thus, lights were deemed impractical. Amused by their apprehensions, Brian succinctly outlined his scheme. Upon hearing Brian's proposal, no one laughed. Only Gordon harbored a hint of skepticism towards Brian's earnestness, while the others voiced their support. Yet, Donnie Fan cautioned, "Will the kite you construct be capable of carrying a person?" "Indeed," Brian replied, "which necessitates a larger and sturdier design. If we ascend to 600 or 700 feet, we should be able to discern any light from the island. Who will ride the kite?" "I shall. Will you not reconsider?" "It is decided." With that, Brian embraced Gordon. Chapter 24. Discovering the enemy's intentions early the next morning. Brian and Bacchus began their kite construction. They devoted considerable effort and meticulous attention to detail, ultimately crafting a large octagonal kite with an area of 70 to 80 square meters, capable of bearing a weight of 100 to 130 pounds. An additional crucial issue arose. How would the occupants signal for descent from the kite? Brian remarked, "I have devised a method to attach a fine string of equal length to the kite line, with a lead ring affixed to it. When we wish to descend, we simply release the lead ring." This approach received praise from Donovan, who acknowledged its merit. The experiment was imminent. With the moon set to rise after 2 a.m. and a gentle breeze wafting through the air, it was indeed an opportune moment for flight. By 9 p.m., the sky had plunged into darkness, devoid of stars, save for the drifting clouds. The kite soared high above, invisible to onlookers. At the center of the athletic field stood the Srelugi S winch, while Brian loaded a sack of 130 pounds of soil into the basket. Donovan and the other three positioned themselves beside the kite, 100 paces from the winch. Upon Brian's command, they tugged the line to launch the kite into the air. Brian, Gordon, Sabuz, Klaus, and Nito were tasked with loosening the winch's ropes to facilitate the kite's ascent. Gradually, the kite ascended, swaying in the breeze. As they released the winch's line, the kite and basket swiftly climbed into the sky, eliciting jubilant cheers from the children as the grand kite lifted off the ground. At that moment, Brian stated, "The current natural conditions are excellent, and the wind is steady. The weather tomorrow is uncertain, so it is best not to postpone the reconnaissance." He inquired, who was willing to go. Jack was the first to break the silence, asserting, "Brother, it is my duty to serve everyone. I proposed it first, so I must go." "Let me go?" Donovan insisted firmly. "Allow me to go," Bacusta added. "Responsibility?" Gordon was taken aback. He sought to clarify the meaning of this statement when Brian suddenly grasped his hand, trembling, and though unseen in the shadows, Gordon imagined Brian's face must have turned pale, his heart undoubtedly racing. "Oh, brother." Jack spoke in a tone entirely unbefitting a child. "Brian, why are you silent?" Donovan interjected. "Jack claims he acts for the collective good. Do we not possess the right to serve the common cause as well?" "What has Jack done?" "What I have done," Jack proclaimed. "One must face the consequences of their own actions. Do not speak recklessly," Brian shouted, attempting to silence his brother. "No." Jack, overcome with emotion, could no longer suppress his words. "I will not conceal the truth any longer. Gordon, Donovan, the reason you find yourselves here, separated from family and loved ones, stranded on this desolate island, it is all entirely my fault. It was I who allowed the Sloughie to set sail, adrift upon the sea. It was a careless mistake, no? A prank. I untied the mooring lines at the Auckland harbor. I intended it as a joke. But when the vessel truly began to drift, panic seized me, and when there was still time to remedy the situation, I failed to inform anyone. An hour passed in the night, upon the surface of the ocean. Please, punish me." With that, Jack broke into tears, and Kate endeavored to console him, yet her efforts proved futile. "Very well, Jack," Brian interjected. "You have confessed to your misdeeds. Do you dare take the risk to atone for your sins?" "Brian, you are being utterly unreasonable," Donovan exclaimed. "For our sake, hasn't Jack already risked himself numerous times?" "Brian, I finally comprehend why, whenever danger arises, it is invariably you and Jack who step forward. Jack, do not blame yourself. We have all forgiven you." Surrounded by his companions, Jack received their comforting words, his sobs echoing as his chest heaved violently. "Allow me to atone for Jack's misdeeds. From the moment this plan was conceived, I considered myself the most suitable for this task. Brother, I am indeed the most fitting." Jack continued to shout, "Do not move." "Very well, Brian." Gordon embraced Brian briefly. With confidence and composure, Brian entered the basket and subsequently signaled for takeoff. The colossal figure gradually faded into the darkness as everyone watched the kite disappear into the night sky. As the kite danced in the air, Brian felt a surge of anxiety, yet he bravely overcame his fear with remarkable poise. The kite had been airborne for quite some time when Brian sensed a slight tremor. It had reached a height that would not ascend further, now hovering between 600 and 700 feet. Exhibiting calmness, Brian gripped the basket with his left hand while holding a telescope with his right. Looking down, the ground appeared as a vast expanse of darkness, with lakes, forests, and cliffs shrouded in obscurity. However, glancing towards the coastline of the island revealed a starkly different scene. It must be that direction. Perhaps it is the reflection of the glaciers? Regardless, there must be land on the eastern side of Chiman Island. At that moment, another glimmer caught Brian's attention. Emanating from the eastern side of the family lake, merely 5 or 6 miles away, within the forest. The light was nestled in the woods, adjacent to the lakeshore. It was the Wollstone gang camping near Bear Rock. These murderous fiends still lingered on the island. Frankie Dan was in grave peril. Brian sensed the urgency to conclude his reconnaissance swiftly. The wind was steadily intensifying, causing the basket to sway violently. He tugged at the signaling cord, which tightened tautly, and lowered the lead ring, immediately shortening the kite's line. Gordon and his companions had been awaiting Brian's descent signal. And while Brian felt he had only lingered in the air for a mere 20 minutes, those on the ground perceived it as an interminable wait. Donovan and his crew, invigorated, began cranking the winch with great effort. A fierce gale arose, and after receiving Brian's signal, over half an hour elapsed before the kite descended to approximately 100 feet above the lake's surface. Suddenly, the kite line began to thrash violently, nearly toppling Donovan and his team to the ground, and ultimately, the line snapped. Brian! Brian! A chorus of terror echoed from the ground, as everyone called out for him. The Wollstone gang had not yet departed. Upon landing, Brian uttered those words. After the kite line was severed, Brian descended slowly and awkwardly from the sky. Thanks to the kite's parachute-like qualities and his adeptness in swimming, traversing the 400 or 500 feet to the lakeshore posed no challenge for him. The burdened kite, having been released, drifted away like fragments in the sky, vanishing toward the northeast. Chapter 25. The rescue of an old friend. Due to the extraordinary peril and exhaustion of the previous night, the youths slept late into the morning before awakening. Upon rising, Gordon and his companions immediately convened in the warehouse to deliberate. What significance do the surrounding mainland and islands hold? Donovan inquired, perplexed. What Brian has articulated is of utmost importance. Thus, this island is not isolated. The troubling reality was that Wollstone and his associates intended to ascend the eastern river, circumventing the lake to the east, and sooner or later, Frankie Dan would be discovered by them. Brian resolved to implement stringent vigilance from that moment onward, forbidding any casual outings, because to camouflage the 2 entrances to the livestock pen and traps with branches and underbrush. In early November, the weather was rainy. On the 17th, the skies cleared and temperatures rose. Donovan and Wilkicus were eager to hunt. One day, while setting snares nearby, Wilkicus stumbled upon a migratory bird, a swallow tethered by a small pouch beneath its wing, yet the pouch was entirely empty. At 2 p.m. on November 21st, Donovan visited Family Lake to fish. Nearby, a flock of over 20 birds, resembling crows, emitted calls that exacerbated his irritation, drawing his attention. The group gradually descended to the ground. Donovan then scrutinized a deceased llama. Noticing a wound on its flank, accompanied by blood, the injury did not appear to be inflicted by other wild beasts. A gunshot wound, Donovan exclaimed. On November 24th at 9 a.m., Brian and Gordon crossed to the opposite bank of the Chelan River, preparing to establish a lookout on the path. Shortly after they disembarked, Brian inadvertently stepped upon something, prompting Gordon, who was trailing behind, to halt and exclaim, "Wait a moment, Brian. What has transpired?" Gordon picked up a fragment that Brian had just crushed, declaring, "Behold, a pipe. Could it be the relic of Verdane? No, that cannot be. If it belonged to someone who perished decades ago, it would not appear so pristine. One can still perceive remnants of tobacco within the bowl. It must have recently fallen. Thus it undoubtedly belongs to Wollstone's gang, who must have traversed this very spot in recent days." By November 27th, 2 days later, the weather began to grow oppressive, with ominous clouds obscuring the sky and distant thunder rumbling, heralding an impending storm. That evening, they secured the doors earlier than usual, gathering in the hall. At 9:30 p.m., the tempest finally arrived, with lightning seeping through the cracks of the door, illuminating the hall, while incessant thunder reverberated as if to topple Auckland Hill. At midnight, the thunder receded, giving way to a torrential downpour. Suddenly, the hound sprang up, darting to the door and beginning to whimper softly, as if sensing something amiss. They armed themselves, with Donovan and Mac rushing to the hall and the warehouse door respectively, pressing their ears against the door to listen intently. Outside, there was naught but silence, yet the hound continued its low whimpering. Suddenly, a gunshot echoed from outside, seemingly not far away. At that moment, a voice cried out for help from beyond the door. "Please, help me." Kate, who was listening intently at the door, whispered, "It's him. Open the door. We must save him." As the door swung open, a drenched man stumbled in, soaked by the rain. Kate recognized him immediately. It was Ivan's son. Chapter 26. Dispelling confusion. Ivanson's unexpected arrival astonished everyone, leaving Gordon and the others in a state of shock. He appeared to be around 30 years of age, robust and strong, with a beard that had grown wild since the incident with the saipan. He swiftly turned and secured the door, pressing his ear against it to listen intently. After ensuring the coast was clear, he stepped into the hall and, illuminated by the flickering kerosene lamp, he beheld the youths before him, muttering, "So, it turns out to be mere children. All just children." Suddenly, his gaze fell upon Kate. "Kate, are you unharmed?" he exclaimed joyfully, grasping her hand. "We, Donnie and I, visited the shore where your small vessel met its fate on that fateful night. We even saw two figures lying there, but when we returned the following morning, they had vanished without a trace." "Indeed, that was the situation on that day," Ivanson continued. "Those two were Obis and Paiku. They were rescued by Woolston, and then everyone headed east. That scoundrel, Loke, claimed he had not seen you, and Woolston remarked, 'She must have been claimed by the sea.' I feared they would deem me worthless and take my life as well. That night, we sought refuge in the forest. The following morning, I contemplated repairing the small boat. However, lacking the necessary tools, I was unable to do so. Hence, we decided to venture to the island in search of a suitable location. We traversed 10 miles along the coastline until we reached the estuary. Woolston and the others dragged the small boat to the harbor at the estuary, hoping to repair it there if we could procure the right tools. By sheer chance, Woolston discovered that someone inhabited the island. How did he make this discovery? Gordon inquired. A week prior, under Woolston's leadership, an expedition had been conducted on the island, leading them to the shores of a great lake where they stumbled upon a tattered frame wrapped in cloth. "Oh, that was the kite we abandoned," exclaimed Donovan and Brian. Although Woolston was unaware of its significance, he was certain it was a creation of human hands. He grew curious about the people residing there, and from that moment forth, I resolved to escape. "How did you come to know of this cave?" Bacchus asked. Woolston, eager to find the island's inhabitants, was increasingly restless. On the evening of November 23rd, one of the men ventured to the southern shore of the lake and noticed light emanating from this entrance. The following day, Woolston himself arrived, concealing himself in the underbrush to observe you. "Did you then flee?" Kate inquired. "Indeed, 12 hours ago, Woolston and his companions ventured out, leaving me in the care of Lauck and Obis. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, seizing an opportunity, I fled into the forest. Upon discovering my escape, they immediately pursued me, armed and relentless. With nothing but a sailor's knife and my own 2 feet, I had no other means to aid me. That day, I ran approximately 15 miles, with the demons hot on my heels, firing their weapons. Several bullets narrowly missed me. Upon reaching the riverbank, I believed that crossing the river would ensure my safety. I sprinted desperately to the river's edge, just as the 2 men arrived, shooting at me. Without hesitation, I plunged into the water and swam fervently to the opposite shore, where I concealed myself in the underbrush. The 2 men on the other side remarked, "He's surely done for. Shot and still alive. He must be dead." The boys recounted their extraordinary encounter to Ivanson. Gordon suggested that if we lent Woolston's group the tools for boat repair, they would cease their harassment of us. Ivanson vehemently opposed this notion, asserting that Woolston was a murderous fiend. Should we do so, they would likely seize all our possessions and perhaps resort to killing to silence us. The boys found Ivanson's reasoning compelling. If they repaired the boat and departed, how would we escape the island? Indeed, could one traverse the Pacific to reach New Zealand? Donovan queried. "Before long, we shall reach the port," Ivanson responded. "To the west of this island lies the ocean, while the other 3 sides are bordered by straits, and it would take merely 60 hours to cross with ease." Then, Brian said in confusion, the pale spots in the light I observed. Chapter 27. Outwitting the enemy spy. Between Cape Raza Pilars on the Pacific coast and Cape Virgin on the Atlantic coast, lies a strait approximately 380 miles long. Discovered in 1520 by the renowned Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan, this strait is known as the Strait of Magellan. The following day, Ivanov presented Stella's map to the boys, providing a detailed explanation. Look, this island, located at 51 degrees south latitude, is Banua Island. You have truly accomplished something remarkable by residing here for over 20 months. It must be quite close to Chile, Gordon exclaimed. Indeed, Ivanov replied. However, despite our arduous journey to find the South American continent, reaching the villages of Chile and Argentina will require traversing hundreds of miles. Moreover, the indigenous people of the Argentine pampas can be perilous. Thus, we must remain here for the time being and devise the safest and most effective plan. As the topic of departing the island arose in their discussions, Gordon inquired with Ivanov about the small boat on the Seaboard. If we manage to repair it, from which direction should we embark? Neither east nor north will suffice. Ivanov responded. If the wind is favorable, successfully navigating through the strait towards a port in Chile will be our triumph. In summary, we must secure the small boat from the Seaboard and eliminate the nefarious Wollston and his gang. Days have passed, and all has remained tranquil. Ivanson speculated that Wollston would not resort to force, but would surely employ cunning to seize Franche Dan. He gathered the youths and remarked, Wollston and his cohorts have long believed that Kate and I are deceased, assuming you are oblivious to these machinations. Perhaps one among them will masquerade as a shipwreck survivor, seeking aid. We must not allow them to succeed. Let us welcome them in, Gordon interjected. Ivanson and Kate concealed themselves in the shadowy recesses of the corridor. Gordon, Brian, Donovan, and Bacustus swiftly made their way to the banks of the Chillon River. Upon noticing the approach of four youths, two men appeared startled and declared, We are survivors. Our ship has capsized. How unfortunate, Gordon exclaimed. Come to our cave. The men, Rock and Obus, presented rather menacing visages, Rock with a narrow forehead and jutting chin, while Obus bore an unremarkable appearance. Once inside the cave, they furtively surveyed their surroundings. Gordon escorted them to the storage area, and by 9 o'clock, the two appeared to have succumbed to slumber. Brian and the others convened in the hall, while Kate and Ivanson secured the corridor door. Ivanson announced, all is prepared. Merely 2 hours had elapsed when murmurs emanated from the storage area. Peering inside, they beheld the two men desperately attempting to wriggle towards the entrance, shifting a large stone that obstructed the door to the right, thereby revealing a small aperture. Just as Rock tugged at the latch to open the door, he was suddenly felled to the ground. Yvonne's son is not dead, Luke exclaimed. Do not let them escape, Yvonne's son commanded. At that moment, Brian and the others arrived at the warehouse, swiftly subduing Obus. In a panic, Luke drew his dagger and lunged at Yvonne's son, yet failed to inflict any harm. Subsequently, he frantically sought an escape, leaping through the doorway where his accomplices stood. However, in less than 10 paces, the sound of gunfire echoed. Yvonne's son had aimed and fired at him, but missed, allowing Luke to flee. This is bad, Yvonne's son shouted. There's S1 left, eliminate him. Please spare my life. Obus pleaded repeatedly. Have mercy on him. Kate interjected. He saved my life. Very well, Yvonne's son conceded. I shall grant you a reprieve for now. Obus, tightly bound, was temporarily confined to a corner of the corridor. They secured the warehouse door firmly, barricading it with stones, maintaining vigilance until the following morning. Chapter 28. A desperate struggle the next morning. Yvonne's son was the first to search for footprints. The chaotic disturbance near the cave suggested that Wollston and his group had indeed been there. However, the absence of blood indicated that Yvonne's son's shot had not struck Luke. Obus appeared dejected. Obus, Kate inquired, you saved my life aboard the Saipan, didn't you? Now, you must save these children. Obus remained silent. Obus, Kate continued, if you continue to associate with Wollston, you will inevitably face execution. Yet, these young ones have saved you. Surely, you possess some semblance of human emotion. Come now, from this moment forth, strive to be a better person. Obus sighed deeply. What should I do? Ivanson suggested, expose Wollston's conspiracy. Where did they come from? You and Lauk arrived from the south, correct? Yes. Where are Wollston and his associates now? Uncertain. Do you believe they will return? Indeed. During lunch, Mike brought him food, yet Obus scarcely touched it. Has this scoundrel been tormented by his conscience? After the meal, Ivanson proposed to investigate the situation in the forest. With Obus captured, only 6 of Wollston's gang remained. In contrast, the youths numbered 15, alongside Kate and Ivan's son, totaling 17. However, the younger children were not included in their ranks. Thus, while Ivan's son undertook reconnaissance, Iveson, Jenkins, Doyle, Costa, along with Kate, Mike, and Jack remained in the cave. With Bacusto on watch, the older youths accompanied Ivan's son on the expedition. At 1 p.m., under Ivan's son's command, the scouting party was formed. They cautiously advanced along the foot of the Oakland Hills. As they passed the Frenchman's grave, the hounds perked up, sniffing the ground. "Take cover." Ivan's son cautioned everyone. "Donovan, your aim is true. If you spot the villains, do not hesitate to eliminate them." Shortly thereafter, they arrived at the outer thicket. Numerous footprints and the remnants of a recently extinguished campfire were evident. "They must have spent the night here," Gordon remarked. "Perhaps they were just here a moment ago." We ventured toward the precipice when, just as Ivan's son was about to speak, gunfire erupted from the right, a bullet whizzing past Brian's head and severing a branch behind him. At that moment, another gunshot rang out, followed by a scream. From among the trees just 50 paces away, something darted forward. The direction of the smoke from the gunshot was where Donovan had fired. First, a dog emerged, followed closely by Donovan himself. "Catch up. Donovan is in peril," commanded Ivan's son. The group swiftly pursued Donovan, and upon reaching the thicket, they discovered a pallid-faced man lying on the ground. "It's Paiku," exclaimed Ivan's son. "Donovan shot him dead. Woolston hasn't fled far," warned Bacosta, vigilant as ever. "He is nearby. Everyone, stay alert." A third gunshot rang out, this time from the left, a bullet soaring just above Sabuza's head. "Are you all right?" Gordon inquired. "I'm fine, Gordon, merely grazed," came the reply. At that moment, Janito shouted, "Brian is missing." With Brian's absence palpable, the dog barked increasingly ferociously. He might be grappling with the enemy, leaving the group anxious for his safety. "Danger! Ivan's son!" cried Klaus, dropping to the ground. Ivan's son immediately crouched down as a bullet narrowly passed over his head. It was one of Woolston's crew, specifically the very man who had escaped the previous night, Lauk. "Lauk, don't run!" Ivan's son shouted, taking aim to fire. Lauk rolled to the ground and vanished from sight. At that moment, Ivan's son observed Brian and Cobb engaged in a desperate struggle. He pinned Brian to the ground and drew a dagger, poised to strike. Just then, Donovan arrived, and Cobb lunged forward, stabbing Donovan several times. Upon seeing Ivan's son and his companions emerge from the concealed thicket, Cobb hastily fled. Despite a barrage of gunfire, Cobb managed to escape. Donovan, gravely wounded in the scuffle, lay motionless with his eyes closed and his complexion pale, unable even to hear Brian's calls. Ivan's son knelt beside Donovan, inspecting his wounds. A triangular gash marred his fourth rib. However, judging by Donovan's breathing, it appeared that his heart remained unscathed, albeit he was severely injured. Brian shouted, "Hurry! Save him! He was injured while trying to rescue me." They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches and lifted Donovan onto it, with 4 of them carrying him. Their journey was largely uneventful until they were approximately 800 or 900 paces from the cave when they suddenly heard shouting. It turned out that when Loke, Cobb, and Paiku sought out Woolston, who was hiding in the cave, Woolston had led Brandon and Baku up Oakland Hill and then down to the riverbank, where they initiated a surprise attack on Frankie Dan. Woolston and Brandon swiftly reached the riverbank, intending to cross. Unbeknownst to them, Baku had already stealthily retrieved the small boat from the cave and was waiting at the shore. Should those 3 escape to the opposite bank, it would spell disaster, as Jack and Costa had been captured as hostages. Ivan's son and his companions raced forward with determination. The hound lunged forward, seizing Brandon by the throat, compelling him to relinquish Costa. Woolston desperately tugged Jack, who was nearly aboard the small boat. In this moment of dire urgency, a man suddenly burst forth from the cavern's hull. A deafening sound erupted as a cannonball struck the boat. It was Mike, who had aimed from the warehouse window at the vessel on the river. Woolston, the murderous fiend, finally met his deserved fate. Only 2 individuals remained on Chiman Island, having fled into the cave. Chapter 29. Setting sail for home. Although Donovan was gravely injured, his breathing had begun to approach normalcy, with Kate tending to his wounds, wrapping them in leaves and bandages. However, Obus had suffered a severed artery at the hands of Woolston, and he was acutely aware of his condition. As Kate cared for him, he murmured upon regaining consciousness, "Thank you, Miss Kate. I must leave you now." Tears streamed from his eyes. There remained a flicker of conscience within this man. He had succumbed to the temptations of villainy, committing misdeeds, Yet he opposed the nefarious plot to murder the youths, resolutely vowing to protect them at all costs. Obus's breathing grew increasingly labored until, around 4 o'clock, he drew his last breath. The children buried Obus beside the grave of Woden, and now 2 crosses stood over that resting place. With the presence of the 2 villains, Loke and Cobb, peace eluded the islanders. Ivinson was determined to eliminate these rogues, arming himself and 3 others, including Gordon, and setting out with Donovan in search of them. The outcome was entirely unexpected. They arrived at the cave's edge and followed the blood trail, discovering Cobb lying on the ground, lifeless for several hours. In his frantic escape, Locke had lost his way and ultimately fell into a trap set by Wilkowski, suffering fatal injuries. The body of Paiku was also found. The 3 were laid to rest together in the trap, which served as their final resting place. The following day, discussions ensued regarding the utilization of the Seabon, Ivinson, Brian, and Bekusta crossed the lake and the East River, arriving at Bear Rock. On December 6th, at noon, as they reached the mouth of the East River, they immediately spotted the small boat of the Seabon, capsized on the beach of Bear Rock. After meticulously inspecting the areas that could be repaired, Ivinson remarked that although they possessed tools, the necessary materials for ship repairs were lacking, making it imperative to transport the vessel to the West River. The next day, they commenced repairs on the ship, which measured 30 feet in length and 6 feet in width. With Kate and Ivinson, a total of 17 individuals could comfortably embark, accommodating 18 without issue. Ivinson not only served as the helmsman, but also possessed remarkable shipbuilding skills, and Bekusta's craftsmanship was commendable, earning him Ivanson's praise. By January 8th, the vessel was finally restored. After more than a month of recuperation, Donovan had fully healed. On February 3rd, the ship was entirely equipped, coinciding with Donovan's complete recovery. His health was robust, and he had a hearty appetite. Kate and Brian assisted him daily in taking 2 to 3 hour walks at the exercise yard. The youths decided to set sail on February 5th. On the eve of departure, Gordon released the llamas, wild geese, and various birds raised in the small shed. The following day, as they prepared to embark, Brian and his companions once more visited the graves of Vodian and Obus to offer their final prayers. Once aboard, Donovan sat beside Ivinson at the stern, steering the vessel, while Brian and Mike manned the sails at the bow, and the others, along with the hunting dog van, gathered upon the deck. As they untied the ropes, the ship set sail. A whirlwind of emotions swirled within the young hearts. Over the course of 2 long years, this island had provided them with a sanctuary, and now they were to part ways, each grappling with a profound, indescribable sentiment. A few hours later, the ship entered the strait, and the sandy beaches of Kinbury Island came into view as they rounded the southern tip, entering the Pacific Ocean. The children could no longer see Chemin Island. Chapter 30. The triumphant return. The small vessel navigated safely through the Magellan Strait. The journey marked by calm winds and smooth waters, filling everyone with joy. They encountered no signs of human presence along the way, precisely what they had hoped for, ensuring their safety. During the night, they glimpsed flickering lights deep within the island. However, no indigenous figures were spotted along the coastline. On February 11th, the small boat continued to sail smoothly, traversing the Smith Strait before entering the Magellan Strait. To the right loomed Mount St. Anna, while to the left, in the depths of Beaufort Bay, stood a magnificent glacier that shimmered brilliantly under the sun's rays. The small boat sailed smoothly, buoyed by a favorable wind, and the briny air proved beneficial for Donovan's health. He enjoyed hearty meals and restful slumber, often taking pride in his own experiences reminiscent of Robinson Crusoe's adventures. On the 12th, they glimpsed Tamara Island, which lacked a harbor. Ivinson skillfully navigated the boat around Tamara Point and resolved to traverse the Magellan Strait, heading southeast. Unlike Banwa Island, one side of this region was marked by a desolate isle, while the other boasted the peaks of the Kruka Peninsula. Ivinson steered the vessel through this terrain, entering the southern waterway, then circumventing Mount Foward, with plans to sail towards Panet Arena Harbor along the eastern shore of the Branisvik Peninsula. On the morning of February 13th, Sabuz, standing at the bow, exclaimed, "I see smoke. Is it the bonfire of fishermen?" Gordon inquired. "No, it appears to be smoke from a steamboat." Ivinson replied, "If it is indeed fishermen, we are not far from land." Brian immediately climbed the mast, proclaiming, "It is a ship. Indeed, it is a ship." In a short while, they discerned the vessel, a large steamboat. The youths aboard the small boat erupted into cheers, promptly signaling with their cannon. The steamboat, having spotted the small craft, drew near within half an hour. It was the Grafton, bound for Australia. This steamboat was indeed en route to Melbourne, the capital of South Australia's Cordillera, making their meeting fortuitous. The steamboat's speed was remarkable, and by February 25th, the Grafton arrived at Auckland Harbour. 15 students from the Chimen School have drifted to the desolate Banua Island, where they have resided for 2 years. Donnie Phan is immensely proud. As the diary penned daily by Bacusta, chronicling the experiences of Frankie Dan, has swiftly been published, selling tens of thousands of copies solely in New Zealand, creating a sensation. The plight of the boys aboard the ill-fated Sloggy has captivated public interest, highlighting Gordon's composure, Brian's integrity, Donnie Phan's bravery, and the indomitable spirit of endurance exhibited by these 15 youths. Their tale has become a widely recounted narrative, drawing fervent attention from all quarters.